Viserys Targaryen sat the Iron Throne like a dragon newly hatched, all fragile confidence and raw ambition bound up in a slender figure. His silver-gold hair gleamed in the torchlight of the throne room, though strands of it clung to his forehead where the heat made him sweat. Anyone looking at him then would have seen a young man both hungry and uncertain, a king crowned by circumstance rather than unassailable right. Yet beneath that uncertainty, a fierce determination glowed in his eyes. This moment, this throne, was the destiny he had claimed since boyhood. He had been raised on the stories of House Targaryen's glory, the forging of the Seven Kingdoms by the Conqueror, the flight of dragons, the centuries of rule from the greatest seat of power in the world. And now it was his. The realm had never expected him, and all of Westeros awaited a sign of what kind of king he might be. He leaned forward, letting one hand rest on a twisted iron arm of the throne, the points jabbing his palm. Pain was a reminder of power. His father, the Mad King, had taught him that, though likely not in the way the old king intended. Viserys could almost sense the ghost of his father pacing behind the dais, gibbering about traitors and wildfire. The memory made him clench his jaw. He glanced down at the hall below, where advisors and courtiers awaited his first pronouncement. Their eyes were as sharp as the blades that composed the throne upon which he sat. He was King Viserys, the third of his name, or the second. Sometimes the numbering itself felt uncertain. By rights, he should be Viserys III, but in the swirl of war and the chaos of the succession, the small folk and even lords rarely cared about precise numbering. They cared only that a new Targaryen with a spark of the old lineage had claimed the seat. His half-smile was as brittle as the metal beneath him. It had not been an easy road to the Red Keep. The usurper Robert Baratheon had fallen in the last year under suspicious circumstances, a hunting accident that ended in a violent scuffle with a boar, or so the official record proclaimed. In truth, Viserys supporters had infiltrated King Robert's circle. Dissent brewed in the capital as the North parted ways from the crown, and Storm's End was embroiled in disputes of inheritance. The realm was at once too large and too fractured to hold itself together without a strong king. Viserys had arrived on Dragonstone, the ancient seat of his house, with a ragged band of loyal followers. The winds of fortune were with him. Highgarden sought new allies. The Iron Islands had threatened once more to declare themselves independent. In the swirl of chaos, the lords and ladies of Westeros had grown tired of endless quarreling, and many cast their hopes upon the last male Targaryen claimant. With measured steps, aided by cunning advisors and a few well-placed bribes, Viserys had landed in the Crownlands with enough men to press a claim. The city had opened its gates more from exhaustion than from loyalty, for King Robert had emptied the coffers in his lust for tournaments and feasting, and his brother Stannis had retreated to Dragonstone in disgust. By the time Viserys marched up to the Red Keep, the gold cloaks had already turned their cloaks once more, this time to him. Triumphant in name, Viserys was crowned in haste by the High Septon, a nervous wisp of a man who trembled at each vow. The realm was far from settled, but at least the seat of power was his, and so was the ancient Targaryen banner, the three-headed dragon, resplendent in black and red. Yet the cost had been high, and the realm was uneasy. Some still called him the Beggar King. Others whispered he was too alike to his father. But he was here at last, perched on the Iron Throne, determined to never let it go. At his right hand stood Ser Jorah Mormont, clad in plate that still bore the faint sigil of the bear from the distant north. Ser Jorah, an exiled knight, had sworn loyalty to House Targaryen in exchange for new lands and new chances. He had once been Daenerys' sworn sword, but in time his loyalty had shifted to Viserys when the promise of return and redemption under the rightful Targaryen king had blossomed. Viserys trusted him, cautiously. As a Targaryen, one learned caution early. Too many whispered secrets shaped every corridor. But Ser Jorah exuded a sense of calm reliability, and at least to Viserys' face, the knight had never wavered. Daenerys, his sister, was nowhere to be seen in this first official court. That was by design. She had left King's Landing a fortnight before, under the pretense of attending to matters in the Reach. Viserys had only half believed her. He remembered how her violet eyes had shone with some hidden conviction. There had been an edge in her voice, a subtle undercurrent of defiance. She had not knelt when he was crowned. She had, in front of all the realm's eyes, given him a shallow courtesy, and he'd accepted it with a tight smile, telling himself that she was his blood, his sister, and that eventually she would come around. But Daenerys had changed in the last few years, blossoming into a woman of remarkable conviction, shaped by trials of her own that he had not entirely witnessed. She had always been the gentler soul in their youth. Yet the word from those who traveled with her whispered of steel in her spine, a confidence that seemed more queenly than she let on. Perhaps, Viserys thought, she had begun to see herself as something more than a supportive younger sister. He told himself that if she tested his authority, he would bring her to heel. Family or not, she was a subject of the realm. But there was a small, nagging worry in his gut. Daenerys had always drawn people to her, like a living flame. Looking upon the assembled lords, ladies, and knights, Viserys decided it was time to speak. He wet his lips and stood. "My lords," he began. His voice trembled only slightly at the start. A hush settled over the hall. "I am your king, Viserys of the House Targaryen, rightful ruler of the Seven Kingdoms. This realm has been fractured by war. I intend to bring peace. But peace cannot come without justice, and justice cannot come without strength. Our coffers are emptied, our roads beset by brigands, and we have only begun to heal from the wounds inflicted during the rebellion against my father. I have returned to restore the rightful order." A wave of rustles and furtive nods moved through the crowd. One or two lords even clapped. Most wore guarded expressions, glancing at one another to see who would commit their favor first. Viserys recognized the precariousness of his position. The Targaryens were no longer the unstoppable force they had once been when dragons soared over these skies. But he knew the power of lineage, tradition, and fear. He ended his short address, letting the hush linger as he resumed his seat. Later that evening, in the privacy of his solar, Viserys let himself exhale. He could feel 1,000 anxieties pressing in on him. Among them was the question of Daenerys. He had dispatched riders to track her movements, but she was elusive. He had not shared his concerns openly with the council, but it gnawed at him. She was his last living sibling, the only other scion of House Targaryen. If she turned against him, it would embolden his enemies. If she claimed the throne for herself, she would almost certainly gain some measure of support. He remembered her beauty, her quiet strength, how people seemed drawn to her kindness. But he also remembered the bitterness in her eyes when she had been forced to cede him the spotlight. The flicker of candlelight sharpened his reflection in the polished wood of the table. He looked drawn, paler than usual, circles etched beneath his eyes. There was no time to rest. Already, messages from the Lords Paramount were arriving in droves. Tywin Lannister in Casterly Rock sent measured courtesies. Nothing more. The Lords of the Reach offered polite welcomes, though they continued to weigh alliances with the rebellious Stormlands. In Dorne, who knew what Prince Doran plotted behind his unreadable facade? And in the north, rumors said that Robb Stark, young and untested, was still deciding whether to swear fealty or claim independence outright. Viserys rubbed his temples. He could almost hear the spirits of his ancestors telling him that these were the burdens of rule, that only a dragon could bear them. But a voice in him asked if he truly was a dragon or only a fragile dreamer. The throne had its price. He gritted his teeth, chasing away doubt. He was a Targaryen, and he would show them all. In the days that followed, Viserys took his seat in the council chamber, where a small group of appointed advisors debated the next steps for the kingdom. Ser Barristan Selmy, the old knight of the King's Guard who had miraculously survived the shifting tide of rulers, offered wisdom gleaned from decades of service. Grand Maester Beneter, a reserved scholar from Old Town, handled communications and healing. Lord Vaemond Valerion, a distant cousin of Targaryen heritage, sat close to Viserys' right, a staunch proponent of restoring old Valyrian traditions. And of course, Ser Jorah was there, his broad arms crossed, a formidable figure looming over any discussion that threatened to become heated. All around the table, the talk revolved around gold, armies, and alliances. Yet, unspoken lingered the question of Daenerys. Viserys noticed how each man eyed him whenever her name arose. It was not that they feared her outright. She had no large standing army, no official support beyond a few sworn swords. But the Targaryen name carried weight, and any rift within the house risked splitting the realm once again. Viserys announced that he would summon Daenerys back to King's Landing. A letter was penned, sealed with the three-headed dragon, and sent out. Couriers scoured the roads and inns for any sign of her caravan. But days stretched into weeks and no reply was forthcoming. Whispers came instead. Daenerys Targaryen had been sighted near Old Town, or was it Lannisport, or was it even Sunspear? The stories conflicted. Some said she had used cunning to slip away. Others claimed she traveled openly, but that local lords refused to hold her for fear of angering the rightful king. Viserys brooded on this. Soon enough, another rumor reached the court. Daenerys had encountered a small khalasar during her travels, Dothraki riders far from their usual haunts. Was that possible? The Dothraki rarely ventured so far west, but times were changing. If she befriended them, it might lend her a fearsome cavalry. He remembered the old days when they had lived across the narrow sea, exiles who could scarcely afford bread. Daenerys had once been married to a Dothraki Khal, a union that ended in tragedy but gave her the respect of those savage horse lords. Could she have rekindled that bond? The notion of her forging a Dothraki alliance in Westeros made Viserys' stomach tighten with worry. He needed his sister back in the fold, or else he would have to find a way to neutralize her. Even if that meant war. But no, he could not think of harming her. She was his little sister, his only living kin. And yet, the realm came first, he told himself, as if repeating a lesson. The realm came first. Meanwhile, the daily affairs of kingship mounted. Justice for banditry, the gathering of taxes, the re-establishment of trade routes, mundane matters that weighed on Viserys' patience. He itched for an opportunity to prove himself the dragon. On the day word arrived that a band of rebellious knights in the Stormlands had seized a royal tax convoy, Viserys jumped at the chance to respond with force. He dispatched Ser Jorah and a troop of Crownlanders to quell the uprising, demonstrating that he would not tolerate open defiance. As he listened to the reports of the incident, a swift victory for the royal forces, the rebellious knights forced to bend the knee, Viserys felt a surge of pride. There was power in the crown, and he would wield it. Yet quiet rebellion still festered. The realm had not forgotten the madness of the Mad King, nor the chaos wrought by Robert Baratheon's abrupt end. They looked to Viserys with suspicion. He met ambassadors in the Red Keep's audience chambers, forcing a courteous smile. Each conversation was a negotiation, each alliance a precarious promise. It was all so fragile. Nights found him pacing his bedchamber, too restless to sleep. The Iron Throne loomed in his dreams, its twisted swords reaching out to snare him in place, as though it were the seat that truly ruled and he but an occupant in chains. One evening, when the drapes of the Red Keep were drawn against a baleful full moon, Ser Barristan and Selmy sought an audience. The Kingsguard Knight was a legend in his own right, having served 3 kings before. His face was marked by lines of concern, though his gaze was steady. Viserys admired the man's composure, even if he sometimes felt overshadowed by the knight's presence, as though Ser Barristan carried an aura of rightful leadership. "Your Grace," said Ser Barristan with a slight bow. "I bring tidings. We have received word from one of our scouts along the Rose Road. They claim to have seen your sister, Daenerys." Viserys, who had been half-dozing, snapped awake. "Tell me everything." Ser Barristan relayed that Daenerys traveled with a small band of riders, no more than 50, though their composition was strange, some Dothraki, some Westerosi knights whose sigils the scout did not recognize. They were heading south, apparently toward Dorne. The Prince of Dorne was known for his patience and long memory grudges. If Daenerys was seeking an alliance with Dorne, that would threaten King's Landing from the south. Viserys' pulse quickened at the thought. He clenched a fist against the arm of his chair. "And she has made no move to return to King's Landing?" he demanded. "No, Your Grace," said Ser Barristan, though the scout said she traveled openly. It did not appear as though she intended to hide from the royal banners. She was seen wearing Targaryen colors, but no crown. Viserys' anger and worry warred within him. He wanted to send riders immediately to intercept her. But he knew that forcibly detaining Daenerys would be a bold move and a dangerous one. His sister was not alone. Even if she had but 50 men, some of them were Dothraki, and that spelled trouble. More importantly, what would the realm think if he moved against his own blood? He needed her loyalty, not her head. Yet if she was forging her own path, ignoring his summons, that itself was an act of defiance. He dismissed Ser Barristan with a curt nod, then called for Ser Jorah, who was in the Red Keep that evening. When the exiled knight arrived, Viserys informed him of the news, pacing the floor in agitation. "She must be brought to heel," he said. "But how? I cannot appear weak by allowing her to roam freely. Nor can I risk turning public sentiment against me by ordering her arrest." Ser Jorah, his grizzled features set in contemplation, said quietly, "She was once the Khaleesi of a great Khal. The Dothraki respect her greatly, perhaps as much as they fear her bloodline. I do not think you will cow her with threats. But maybe you can extend an olive branch, a sign of goodwill. Invite her to King's Landing under safe conduct." "That is precisely what I did," Viserys snapped. "She ignores my summons." "Then, Your Grace, you might have to go to her yourself," said Jorah gently. "Meet her upon neutral ground. Show her you are not afraid. Remind her of your shared blood before forces beyond our reckoning tear you apart." Viserys' eyes flashed with uncertainty. The idea of riding out to meet Daenerys both thrilled and terrified him. He feared she might reject him publicly, or worse, entrap him with loyal men of her own. But a part of him yearned to see her again, to settle this growing schism in their house. He sensed that if they did not meet soon, the realm itself would tear them further apart until war came once again to Westeros, with Targaryen pitted against Targaryen. Word was sent forth that the king would travel south on a progress to witness the state of the Dornish borders. Officially, that was the purpose, to show the realm that King Viserys was not afraid to visit the edges of his domain. Unofficially, it was to intercept Daenerys, to speak to her directly. Preparations began in a flurry. The king's personal guard, along with a modest retinue of lords and ladies, would accompany him. The gold cloaks in King's Landing murmured at the risk, but Viserys pressed on. He told himself that only a demonstration of confidence could strengthen his rule. They set out on a crisp morning. The king rode a fine white charger, its barding embroidered with the three-headed dragon. Beside him rode Ser Barristan Selmy, Ser Jorah Mormont, and a handful of other king's guard in gleaming plate. Wagons of supplies followed, along with minor lords who sought favor by attending the king's progress. The roads were surprisingly quiet, though the group encountered small folk who lined the villages to catch a glimpse of the silver-haired Targaryen. Viserys tried to appear regal, nodding politely, but he could not shake the anxious knot in his stomach. They traveled slowly, an imposing cavalcade that spent nights at local holdfasts or, in some cases, camped under the stars. Viserys took the measure of the crownlands and the northern edge of the reach as they passed. He saw the fields that had been left fallow after the recent rebellions, the villages that still showed the scars of pillaging. He listened to pleas from local folk who begged for relief from taxes, for roads free of bandits, for justice. Each plea chipped away at his confidence, reminding him of how much needed to be done. He began to understand that being king was more than possessing the throne. One had to care for the realm as a shepherd cares for his flock. Yet was he not also a dragon destined to conquer? The duality weighed on him. Near the Mandar River, a local messenger brought news that Daenerys had passed 2 days prior with a small company and was indeed heading toward Dorne. The messenger described her with reverence, a slender, silver-haired woman dressed in fine leathers, carrying herself with a dignity that belied her youth. She had paused only long enough to water her horses and purchase supplies. When asked if she carried any message for the king, she had said nothing but offered a small, melancholy smile. Viserys' heart twisted at the thought. He pressed on, hoping to close the gap. Along the Rose Road, they found a few more signs of her passage, impressions in the ground from Dothraki horses, local rumors about a beautiful woman with violet eyes, stares from peasants who said she had been kind, distributing coins to the needy. Each tale grated on Viserys. Daenerys was winning hearts while he raced to catch her. He resented the comparison, though a small part of him admired her compassion. Had she always been so warm to those beneath her station? In their youth, overshadowed by the memory of the rebellion, they had clung to each other for survival, yet he had often been harsh with her, driven by his own desperation and pride. Perhaps she had outgrown him in ways he could not quite fathom. The king's company reached the Dornish marches under a blazing sun. The rolling hills gave way to craggy outcrops and sandy stretches that hinted at the desert beyond. To the east lay the Prince's Pass, the route leading deeper into Dorne. Viserys felt a bead of sweat roll down his brow. They were venturing far from the center of his power, entering a land famously independent. Prince Doran Martell had sworn no open hostility since Robert's death, but neither had he warmly embraced Viserys' claim. The memory of Elia Martell's fate at the hands of the Lannisters under Aerys' watch still stung Dorne's pride. Even though Aerys himself was long dead, Viserys recalled that bitter history, feeling the burden of a father's sins weigh upon him yet again. It was at a small crossroads inn, shaded by a lone palm tree, that Viserys finally learned Daenerys was less than half a day's ride ahead. The innkeeper, an old woman with leathery skin, said Daenerys had stopped there the previous evening to let her horses rest. The men with her, some clad in dusty travel leathers, were quiet, though they watched Daenerys with something akin to devotion. The old woman gave no sign of recognizing Viserys for who he was, though the retinue made it clear he was someone important. She merely shrugged and said, "If ye ride hard, ye might catch her near the next well." Viserys did not hesitate. He ordered his knights to ride on, a hush falling over the company as they sensed the confrontation that lay ahead. They traveled in the scorching heat, raising dust behind them, until at last they spotted a small group of travelers cresting a low hill. From a distance, Viserys could see Daenerys' silver hair shining in the sun, a banner with the three-headed dragon fluttering at her side. His heart hammered in his chest as if it might crack his ribs. The time for half measures was over. He signaled his party to slow, and Daenerys must have noticed, for her group also reined in. They stood across a small expanse of land, two Targaryens gazing at each other under the blazing sky. Viserys noticed at once that she had grown even more regal in bearing than the last time he'd seen her in King's Landing. She wore a light riding cloak over breeches and boots suited for travel. Two Dothraki riders flanked her, their hair in long braids. A pair of Westerosi knights lingered behind, unmarked by any sigil. One might have been a Sellsword, the other a younger man with solemn eyes. Viserys approached slowly, flanked by Ser Barristan and Ser Jorah. He saw Daenerys' expression shift, something like a mixture of relief and sorrow. Then she walked forward, alone, closing the distance until they stood but a few feet apart. Brother and sister, heirs of a fallen dynasty, now face to face. "Daenerys," he said, more hoarsely than he intended. She inclined her head, a gesture of respect but not quite fealty. "Viserys." For a moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched, heavy with memories and hurts unspoken. Finally, Viserys forced a smile. "You've been avoiding me." Daenerys looked at him steadily. "I have been traveling. You have ignored my summons." There was an edge to his voice, unbidden. He felt the eyes of his men upon him, but he could not mask his frustration. Her gaze flickered. "If you intended only to see me, why not come yourself sooner? I have not hidden my path. I merely chose not to bend to the will of others when I have my own duties." "Duties?" He let out a mirthless laugh. "What duties could you have that outweigh your king's command?" She took a breath and he recognized the steel behind her eyes. "I serve the realm in my own way. You sit the throne, yes, but that does not mean I must always be by your side. There is suffering in the countryside. I have seen it. People who lost everything under the usurper and the wars that followed. I have tried to help them where I can." Viserys felt the sting of her words. It sounded too close to a rebuke of his own neglect. "Then come to King's Landing," he said, pressing. "Help me there, where we can rule together. I do not desire a rift in our house." Daenerys' lips parted and she spoke quietly, so only he and the closest of their attendants might hear. "I have not forgotten how you treated me, brother. In the old days, across the narrow sea, when we had nothing and you blamed me for every slight, every misfortune. You say we can rule together, but I have felt how you look upon me with suspicion, with jealousy." His cheeks flushed. "That was the past. I was a boy. We have both grown." Her gaze flicked to the men behind Viserys, then back to him. "Have we?" A moment's hesitation. "I want what is best for Westeros, for our house. But I will not be cowed. We have no dragons now but ourselves, and if we fail these people, we fail the legacy our ancestors built." Ser Barristan shifted uneasily. Ser Jorah's jaw was taut. Viserys realized how precarious this moment was. If he pushed too hard, she might ride away and declare herself a rival queen. If he was too lenient, he appeared weak. The memory of the Iron Throne's cold metal pressed upon his mind. Finally, he extended his hand. "Come back with me, Dany. I need you at court." Her eyes flickered with emotion. She did not take his hand. "I will ride with you, brother," she said, "but know that my loyalty is to the good of the realm first, not simply to your crown." Viserys' temper flared, but he forced himself to nod. "So be it," he managed, quiet enough not to lose face before his men. "We ride for Sunspear next. The Prince of Dorne awaits our presence, and we will see if House Martell will ally with us or remain aloof." You will ride by my side, sister. It was more a statement than a request. She inclined her head again. Very well. Their combined party continued into Dorne, forging an uneasy alliance. Daenerys rode near Viserys but rarely spoke to him except about the details of the journey. Her retinue mingled with his men, though it was not without tension. The Dothraki eyed the Westerosi knights suspiciously, and the knights regarded the Dothraki as half-savage. Yet no violence broke out, thanks partly to Daenerys's calm assurances and the stoic watchfulness of Ser Barristan. Viserys found himself unsettled by how naturally Daenerys bridged cultural divides. The small folk they passed seemed drawn to her, especially when they saw how she spoke kindly to them, paying for supplies with fair coin, ensuring that none of her riders stole from the local farmland. Viserys tried to do the same, though it did not come as easily to him. He had spent so long thinking about the throne, about power, that the notion of caring for the local folk felt secondary. Yet he understood the optics and forced himself to be gracious. As they neared Sunspear, the climate grew hotter, the wind drier. The Martell's seat was a strong fortress of pale stone, perched at the edge of a shimmering sea. The approach to Sunspear was fraught with political meaning. Dorne had never fully forgiven House Targaryen for the death of Elia Martell, nor the brutality that accompanied it. Yet House Targaryen also had centuries of intermarriage with Dornish princes and princesses, a complicated tapestry of alliances and betrayals. Viserys hoped to rekindle some measure of alliance here. If he could secure Dorne, it would strengthen his claim immeasurably. And if Daenerys was with him, perhaps the Dornish would see that House Targaryen was more than a single uncertain king. Prince Doran Martell greeted them with a reserved dignity, flanked by his daughter Arianne and his guard. The water gardens behind the palace were lush with fountains and fragrant blossoms, a Dornish paradise amid the desert. Viserys tried to present himself as a worthy king, wearing embroidered silks that bore the Targaryen dragon. Daenerys, by contrast, wore simpler attire, but her radiance drew the eye of every courtier. Prince Doran, gray of hair and deliberate of speech, inclined his head to both Targaryens, but Viserys felt a subtle chill behind his polite manner. Over the course of several days, feasts and discussions were held. Prince Doran listened as Viserys expounded on the future of Westeros under Targaryen rule. The king offered Dornish autonomy in local matters, an official condemnation of the atrocities committed against Elia Martell, and a promise of beneficial trade. Yet Prince Doran's eyes often drifted to Daenerys as though he wondered what her role in all this truly was. She spoke softly, advocating compassion for the war-torn regions, urging a new era that might break the cycle of violence that had plagued the Seven Kingdoms. Viserys noticed how the Dornish lords and ladies seemed more receptive to her entreaties than to his. Bitterness churned within him, though he struggled to hide it behind a regal mask. How is it that he, the king, felt overshadowed by his own sister? One night, after a lavish banquet in the colonnade, Viserys wandered the gardens alone to clear his head. Water trickled softly from carved fountains. The scent of night-blooming flowers hung in the warm air. Torchlight cast shifting shadows on the walls. He found Daenerys seated by a pool, trailing her fingers in the water. He hesitated, uncertain if he was welcome. She glanced over her shoulder and acknowledged him. He sat beside her. For a long time, they said nothing, simply listening to the water. Finally, he asked quietly, "Do you trust me as your king?" She studied his face. "I trust that you are my brother." It was not the unequivocal yes he'd hoped for. He swallowed. "I am trying, Dany. Truly. This realm is complicated. The lords expect me to be strong. The small folk need me to be merciful. The memory of our father haunts me, and the memory of the usurper's rule haunts them. I feel pulled in every direction." Her eyes softened. "I know. It is never easy wearing a crown." He let out a breath. "You speak as though you have worn it." Daenerys' lips curved in a sad half-smile. "I have worn responsibilities that you never saw. But that is in the past. Still, you follow your own course." His tone was not accusing now, but plaintive. "Am I so terrible that you cannot serve by my side without fear?" She shook her head. "It's not that. It's I have a path to walk, and I am not certain it aligns perfectly with yours. My time among the Dothraki, my losses, my struggles, they taught me things about leadership, about compassion, about what power does to people." Her gaze was distant. "I want to make certain that if I stand beside you, I am not simply enabling another reign of terror." Viserys felt that old anger flare. "I am not our father." "No, you are not," she agreed softly. "But you walk a knife's edge. I want to help you, but if you cannot see that justice begins with humility and that the realm's wounds will not be healed by fear alone, then I can't pledge myself fully to your cause." He clenched his hands in frustration. "You speak as though you wish to be queen in your own right." Her expression flickered with guilt or perhaps sorrow. "I have no hunger for that crown," she said, "but I cannot deny what people see in me. Some want me to claim it. And if you act like a tyrant, if you fail them, they will come to me. And I do not know if I would refuse." It was a blunt admission. Viserys stared at her, feeling both betrayal and a strange respect. At least she was honest. "Then help me ensure that does not happen," he said, voice trembling. "Help me be the king they need." For a heartbeat, Daenerys was silent. Then she nodded once. "I will try, brother." In the weeks that followed, Viserys redoubled his efforts to negotiate with Prince Doran. Daenerys' presence proved crucial. She showed a willingness to listen to Dornish grievances, to speak of a future where Dorne's interests were respected, where old wounds might heal. Slowly, Prince Doran's frosty exterior thawed. A tentative agreement was reached. Dorne would remain within the Seven Kingdoms under King Viserys' rule in exchange for certain privileges, most notably the royal condemnation of the old crimes against Princess Elia and her children, along with financial restitution for Dornish lands ravaged during Robert's rebellion. Viserys chafed at the cost, but he recognized the necessity of alliance. In the end, a formal ceremony sealed the agreement. It was not a joyous celebration, but a solemn, careful bridging of the rift. Despite this diplomatic success, the tension between Viserys and Daenerys simmered. He sensed that she never fully pledged herself to him, that she walked at his side out of a sense of obligation or pity, rather than loyalty. Her retinue, small as it was, remained steadfastly hers. The Dothraki among them only obeyed Viserys insofar as Daenerys deemed it acceptable. The same was true for the handful of knights who seemed to have sworn fealty to her personally. Viserys saw how the Dornish court looked at her, a mixture of wonder and curiosity. Their eyes occasionally drifted to him. The beggar king turned real king, but it was his sister who drew them with warmth. At last, the time came to depart Dorne. Prince Doran graciously saw them off, wishing them a safe journey northward. Viserys resolved to bring Daenerys back to King's Landing in triumph, to place her by his side in official ceremonies, thereby quelling rumors of strife between them. He imagined how the realm would perceive it, the Targaryen siblings, united, ushering in a new age. The notion soothed his anxieties. They set forth, traveling slowly once again. The scorching Dornish sun gave way to milder heat as they passed through the Prince's Pass. One afternoon, they camped near a narrow stream. Daenerys walked among the travelers, checking on the horses, speaking to a pregnant woman who traveled in the king's caravan, ensuring that she had enough water. Viserys watched from a distance, feeling a flicker of jealousy. Could he not do the same? But when he tried to engage the commoners, they bowed hastily, offered clipped replies, and averted their gaze. They seemed intimidated by him. He wondered how Daenerys exuded such warmth without even trying. Late that evening, when the moon was high and a gentle breeze stirred the desert air, a scream rent the silence. Viserys bolted upright from his bedroll, hand going to the hilt of his sword. Shouts echoed across the camp. He could see torches flaring, confusion swirling. Ser Jorah came rushing. "Raiders," he growled. "Bandits, or perhaps Sellswords." They attacked the eastern side of the camp. Viserys sprang into action, gathering what men he could. They surged toward the noise, swords drawn. By the time they reached the fray, Daenerys was already there, flanked by her Dothraki, fighting off a group of assailants. Her braided companions wielded arcs with lethal grace, cutting down two of the attackers. Daenerys herself clutched a small dagger. Viserys' heart thundered at the sight of her in harm's way, even as he marveled at her composure. She stood with a defiant glare, protecting the pregnant woman behind her. Viserys' knights joined the fight, quickly gaining the upper hand. The raiders wore mismatched armor, likely a ragged band of Sellswords lured by the rumor of a royal caravan carrying valuables. Clashes of steel lit the darkness. Bodies fell. The king himself swung his blade with desperation, still unsteady in real battle despite training. A tall Sellsword came at him, and Viserys parried clumsily. Sparks flew as the sword scraped. Then Ser Jorah closed in, dispatching the attacker with a swift strike. Viserys breathed hard, adrenaline coursing. When the dust settled, half a dozen raiders lay dead or wounded, the rest fled. A few of Viserys' men had been injured, though none too gravely. Daenerys' Dothraki had lost one rider. The pregnant woman was shaken but unharmed. Daenerys stood among them, her hair disheveled, sweat beading her brow. Her eyes flashed with fury and concern as she surveyed the aftermath. Viserys approached her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice trembling with the aftershock. She shook her head. "No. You." He shook his head in return. A strange moment of unity passed between them. Both of them had risked their lives for the same cause. For that instant, the memory of old enmities fell away, replaced by the raw truth that they were Targaryens, siblings in a dangerous world. Daenerys placed a hand lightly on his arm, and he felt a surge of gratitude and relief. The camp spent the rest of the night alert, posting extra guards. By dawn, they tended to the wounded, buried the dead. Viserys oversaw the disposal of the raiders, anxious to move on. Before leaving, he pulled Daenerys aside. "Thank you for defending our people," he said, the words tasting strange on his tongue, praise he was not accustomed to giving. I saw your courage." She looked down, then nodded. "They are our people," she said simply. "I only did what needed to be done." The journey continued. Gradually, the land transitioned back into the lush environs of the Reach. They passed the fields that fed the realm, villages that dotted the countryside. Viserys noticed that Daenerys took every opportunity to meet the people, to speak to them. He tried to do the same, but lacked her natural ease. Still, the bond forged in that nighttime raid lingered between them, a sense that they might truly stand together. At last, after weeks of travel, King's Landing rose before them. Sprawling and chaotic, the city enveloped them in its noise and smell. The Red Keep perched atop Aegon's high hill, a crimson fortress that was now Viserys' seat of power. As their caravan approached the city gates, curious crowds gathered. Word must have spread of the king's return and the presence of the silver-haired princess at his side. Viserys rode at the head, Daenerys beside him, their banners intermingled. The gold cloaks opened a path, and soon they were wending through the city's winding streets, up toward the keep. In the outer courtyard, the king's advisors awaited them, along with a throng of courtiers, knights, and curious onlookers. Viserys dismounted, then turned to help Daenerys down, an unspoken gesture of unity. She allowed him to take her hand, her expression calm but solemn. Applause broke out among some of the crowd, more out of excitement for spectacle than any genuine loyalty, perhaps, but it stirred Viserys' heart all the same. Within the Red Keep, Viserys led his sister into the throne room, where he would formally receive her as a royal guest and declare their unity before the assembled court. The high windows admitted shafts of golden light, illuminating the twisted metal of the Iron Throne. Viserys took his seat, trying not to wince as an edge jabbed his side. He motioned for Daenerys to stand before him. A hush fell. Lords and ladies craned their necks, some murmuring in anticipation. "Daenerys, storeborn of the House Targaryen, my sister, blood of my blood," Viserys pronounced, each word resonating in the cavernous chamber. "She has traveled far to stand beside me. Let it be known throughout the realm that Daenerys is welcomed in King's Landing as a royal princess of the blood, beloved of House Targaryen. She shall counsel me in matters of state, that we may together restore prosperity to the Seven Kingdoms." Daenerys stood poised, her bearing quiet yet resolute. She inclined her head to Viserys. The air crackled with expectation. Any who looked closely might notice the tension in her shoulders or the flicker of hesitation. Yet outwardly, she accepted the honor bestowed upon her. The lords and ladies broke into polite applause, though Viserys saw in their eyes the swirling complexity of opinions. Some were relieved, hoping that the siblings' unity meant stability. Others were wary, wondering if this was a prelude to another internal power struggle. But for the moment, the spectacle was enough. A Targaryen king and his sister princess standing together in the ancient seat of their forebears. Ser Jorah, among the onlookers, caught Daenerys' gaze. A shadow of concern passed over his face, though he bowed to her. She dipped her head in acknowledgement. Viserys observed this exchange with mild irritation. He still questioned Ser Jorah's true loyalties, uncertain if the knight served him faithfully or if his heart belonged to Daenerys or to some other interest entirely. But that was a worry for another day. Over the ensuing weeks, King's Landing buzzed with the novelty of Daenerys' arrival. She was assigned a suite of rooms in Maegor's Holdfast near the king's own chambers. She began attending council sessions, offering a voice that was often more moderate than Viserys. Some nights, she walked through the city incognito, accompanied by a small guard, distributing alms to the poor in Flea Bottom, a gesture that left Viserys both impressed and annoyed, as it seemed to undermine the official structures of his rule. Yet the small folk began calling her the people's princess, and the name spread like wildfire. Viserys found himself torn. On the one hand, Daenerys was bolstering the Targaryen name with her displays of compassion. On the other hand, her popularity made him feel overshadowed. During court gatherings, foreign envoys would often greet her with as much reverence as they did the king, sometimes more. Whispers claimed that she had the qualities of a ruler that Viserys lacked. The king's temper simmered at these rumors, though he tried to keep it in check. One afternoon, during a small council meeting, an argument erupted between Viserys and Daenerys regarding the punishment of a rebellious bannerman in the Riverlands. Daenerys urged clemency, wanting to negotiate. Viserys insisted on an armed response to show strength. Voices rose. The other counselors squirmed in their seats, unsure where to cast their support. Finally, Viserys slammed his palm on the table. Enough, he snapped. I am the king, and I have decided. Daenerys fixed him with a stare. Very well, your grace, she said, each word icy. She left the chamber before the meeting was adjourned. The tension was palpable. Afterward, Ser Jorah approached Viserys, looking pained. Your grace, if I may speak plainly. No, Viserys cut him off, glowering. I've had enough advice. Leave me be. He regretted the sharpness of his tone, but felt too angry to apologize. He resented the way everyone seemed to look to Daenerys for kindness and wisdom. Did they not see him as a decisive ruler, forging the realm back together? Did they forget the hardships he endured in exile, the humiliations he suffered while planning to reclaim what was rightfully his? That evening, Viserys paced his solar. He recalled Daenerys' words months ago: if he acted like a tyrant, the people would turn to her. Was that what was happening? Were they turning to her anyway, not because of tyranny, but because of her undeniable charisma and empathy? He took a long pull from a goblet of wine, trying to quell his roiling thoughts. Meanwhile, Daenerys had retreated to her chambers. She stood on a balcony overlooking Blackwater Bay, the moonlight silvering her hair. She was joined by one of her knights, a gaunt man named Ser Willem, who had followed her from the Reach. He expressed concern about the king's temper. Daenerys sighed. He is my brother. I want to support him. But I cannot stand by if he makes decisions that will plunge the realm into more bloodshed. Then you must speak your mind, princess, Ser Willem said gently. She nodded. Yet she knew that each time she spoke against him, the rift widened. She glanced out at the dark waters, remembering her youth across the sea, the nights she prayed for safety, for a home. She had thought that returning to Westeros with Viserys on the throne would be the end of her wandering. Now she felt more lost than ever, tethered to a brother who might prove unfit for the crown and terrified of the possibility that the realm might one day force her to challenge him. The following week brought a crisis. A delegation from the north arrived unexpectedly, headed by none other than Robb Stark, who styled himself as king in the north after Robert Baratheon's downfall. He had come to negotiate. Winter was looming, and the north needed southern grain supplies to avoid starvation. Yet the north was fiercely proud and had no desire to bend the knee again, not after so much blood had been spilled. Viserys viewed this as an opportunity to force submission. He convened the court in the throne room to greet Robb Stark. The young wolf stood tall, auburn hair framing a resolute face. His retinue was small, just a few trusted bannermen and the fearsome great Jon Umber. As Robb Stark strode forward, every eye tracked his progress. Viserys greeted him coolly, seated on the Iron Throne. You come to us at last, Stark. Have you come to bend the knee? Robb Stark's jaw tightened, but he kept his tone measured. I have come to treat with the king about matters of mutual benefit. Winter is coming, and my people face hardships. We need trade to secure our survival. And in return? Viserys asked, arching a brow. Robb Stark squared his shoulders. In return, the crown may count on the North's aid in fending off any foreign threats or major rebellions. But we will not bow as we once did. The North will remain free. A flurry of murmurs rippled through the chamber. Viserys felt anger flare. And what of the Targaryen claim over the North that has stood for centuries before Robert's rebellion? Do you think the North can simply choose to walk away from the ancient bond? Robb Stark's eyes flashed. We do not forget the horrors inflicted by the Mad King upon my grandfather and uncle. Viserys' knuckles whitened on the throne's arm. That was my father, not me. Still, the scars linger, Robb said evenly. The tension in the hall was palpable. Viserys glanced at Daenerys, who stood to the side with folded hands, her face unreadable. He knew she sympathized with those wronged by their father's reign. He felt cornered, disrespected. You propose a trade agreement while spurning fealty, Viserys said. You dare call yourself king in the north in my presence? That is treason. Robb Stark maintained his composure. Call it what you will. I have come in good faith. The realm is fractured, your grace. Perhaps it is time to accept new realities. An alliance of equals rather than overlord and vassal. Viserys bristled. If he accepted that, he would be admitting he did not rule all of Westeros. It would encourage the Iron Islands, the Stormlands, and others to chip away at his authority. Yet if he refused, he risked pushing the North to war again. With winter coming, the North might not have much appetite for war, but desperation could lead to unexpected alliances, perhaps with Daenerys if she turned from him, or even with foreign powers. He felt his pulse pounding in his temples. Ser Barristan stepped forward gently. Your Grace, perhaps this discussion is better held in private, with fewer ears to feed the rumor mill. Viserys hesitated, then nodded curtly. Very well. Stark, you will stay in the Red Keep as our guest while we consider these proposals. Guards, show him to a suite of rooms. Robb Stark inclined his head. Thank you, your grace. As the northern party was led away, Viserys rose from the throne and strode out, ignoring the murmurs of the court. Daenerys followed. When they reached a secluded corridor, he rounded on her. Do you see how they test me? The North? They scorn my authority. She spoke softly. They have their reasons, Viserys. Perhaps it would not be so ill to allow them some measure of autonomy given their unique hardships. We could ally ourselves without demanding total fealty. He exhaled sharply, anger flaring again. And let them call themselves a kingdom? Mock my rightful claim? I will look weak. You will look wise, she countered. Mercy and compromise can be strengths. Our house should rule through unity, not fear. Viserys' voice rose. You want me to bow to them, is that it? Bend to every whim until I'm no king at all but a figurehead. Daenerys pressed her lips together. No, I want you to find a balance. To be a king who listens as well as commands. He seethed for a moment, then spun on his heel. I must think on this, he muttered. I will not be lectured in my own halls. Good night, sister. With that, he left her in the corridor, her face stricken by the dim torchlight. Days passed, fraught with negotiations. Robb Stark insisted on recognition of northern independence in exchange for robust trade and defensive alliances. Viserys raged against the notion, yet every time he conferred with his council, the practicalities reared up. The realm was already fractious, the coffers were strained, and the king could ill afford another war. Secretly, even some of his advisors admitted that making a deal might be preferable to the risk of another bloody conflict. Daenerys urged him to find common ground, to carve out a compromise. The northern lords were proud, but also realistic. They needed grain. Perhaps a treaty could be fashioned that secured mutual defense without formal fealty. But Viserys balked, seeing it as an erosion of the monarchy's prestige. Late one evening, after yet another fruitless council session, Viserys paced his chambers. He felt cornered, disrespected by the realm he had fought so hard to claim. His father's ghost seemed to taunt him from the shadows, whispering that a king must keep them all in line with fear. Daenerys' voice echoed in his head, urging mercy, compromise, alliances built on respect rather than tyranny. He poured wine into a cup, then hurled it across the room. The vessel shattered against the wall, dark liquid splattering like blood. A timid knock sounded. He barked an invitation to enter. The door opened, revealing Daenerys, her expression cautious. She stepped inside, closing the door softly. Brother, she began. I heard about the council's stalemate. He turned away, not wishing to see the compassion in her eyes. They want me to sign away half the realm's prestige. The North will become an independent kingdom in all but name. And what next? Dorne might do the same, or the Iron Islands. Then what remains of the Seven Kingdoms? She moved closer. The realm is broken. Perhaps we must rebuild it piece by piece, forging alliances that respect each region's needs. It might not look like the Seven Kingdoms of old, but it could be stronger in the long run. He met her gaze, a storm brewing in his violet eyes. You speak as though the traditions of our house mean nothing. She sighed. I speak as someone who has seen the cost of clinging too tightly to what once was. Let the future be shaped by reason, not pride. He closed his eyes, inhaling sharply. For a long moment, he did not speak. Then his voice emerged, heavy with anguish. And if I refuse? If I demand the North's fealty by threat of force, would you stand with me? Daenerys averted her eyes. I cannot say I would. I will not support a war of aggression against a people who have legitimate grievances. Nor will the realm. You risk another rebellion that could tear everything apart. His head bowed. The admission cut him deeply. He felt the sense of betrayal creeping in, even though she was being honest. So you would stand against me? If you forced a bloody war for pride's sake? She hesitated, then nodded. I would. I love you, Viserys, but I love this realm too. We Targaryens have spilled enough blood. There must be another way. The words hung like a blade between them. Viserys' shoulders sagged as the weight of it all bore down. He knew that pressing the issue might lead to civil war. Yet giving in felt like a humiliation, a betrayal of everything he believed about their ancestral birthright. His mind churned, torn by conflict. I need time, he whispered at last. Daenerys touched his arm gently. I understand. I will leave you to your thoughts. She turned and left. Viserys stood alone in the flickering candlelight, wrestling with a decision that would shape the fate of Westeros and the future of House Targaryen. He remembered how he had dreamed as a boy of wearing the crown, of restoring the glory of the dragons. Now, with the weight of the Iron Throne on his shoulders, he felt that boy's dreams slipping away. The realm was not a shining stage for his personal triumph, it was a fragile tapestry of needs, loyalties, and resentments all bound by the thinnest threads. One wrong tug and it would unravel into chaos. He thought again of Daenerys, the devotion she commanded, her unwavering compassion. He recognized that if he made a single grave misstep, if he became too much like their father, she would defect. And if that happened, the realm might rally around her. The unity of House Targaryen would shatter, and another bloody chapter would be written in Westeros's history. At last, he sank into a chair, pressing his hands over his eyes. The king felt more like a beggar than ever, pleading with fate not to strip him of the one thing he had fought so long to claim. He wondered if he was strong enough to bend so the realm would not break. And in the back of his mind, a whisper of fear told him that Daenerys might already be lost to him, her ideals too strong to be contained, her compassion a beacon that might one day eclipse his crown entirely. Viserys sat alone at the long table in his solar, the shards of a broken wine cup still glittering on the stone floor near the wall. He had not called a servant to clean them yet because he found himself staring at the dark drops of wine on the floor, thinking they looked like blood. A single candle flickered in the draught from the window, revealing his face in a wavering, uncertain light. He was living in the shadow of choices he had never imagined making. The North's demands gnawed at him, his father's tyranny had ignited a rebellion in the past, and Viserys knew the realm would never forgive him if he repeated such errors. Yet letting the North go free felt like an admission of weakness, the final blow to a dream he had nursed through years of exile. Outside the door, a faint shuffle of boots announced someone's presence. He guessed it was Ser Barristan or Ser Jorah, eager to advise him on the northern question, or perhaps to see whether the king was stable enough to be approached. Since the heated council session with Robb Stark, the Red Keep's atmosphere had grown tense. The hushed footsteps retreated, replaced by silence. No one wanted to agitate the king further, and Viserys was just as glad to be left alone. When his mind churned too hard, he would think back to the day he was crowned, how he had imagined the entire realm sweeping forward to laud the return of House Targaryen. But the lords had their own ambitions and the small folk their own struggles. Life had not frozen in place, awaiting the Targaryens. The realm had moved on without them, forging new loyalties, new grudges, new expectations. He had arrived like a half-forgotten scion of a dynasty that was more legend than lived reality. Even Daenerys, his own sister, seemed an agent of unstoppable change. He recalled her words, "If you force a bloody war for pride's sake, I cannot stand by you." And that was the rub, for pride was precisely what he had clung to in those long years of suffering. He heard his own voice echo in his memory, "I will not be lectured in my own halls." It sounded petulant now, even to his own ears. Anger flared in him, anger at Daenerys for making him feel small and uncertain, but also anger at himself for caring so much. He stood abruptly, causing the chair to scrape over the floor. One heavy stomp scattered the shards of glass further. At last, he yanked open the door and shouted for a servant to clean the mess. Before dawn, Viserys summoned the small council for an emergency meeting. The men around the table stifled yawns, hastily belting on their cloaks. One by one, they took their seats, Grand Maester Benedor with his half-moon spectacles perched on a long nose, Lord Vaemond Valerion still tying back his silver-flecked hair, and others anxious to discover what the king would decree. Daenerys arrived last, quiet, her face betraying little despite the surprise of the early hour. Viserys cleared his throat. "We have delayed too long," he said, his voice still hoarse from sleep. "Stark is in the Red Keep, waiting. The North is beyond that door. A single gesture could turn them either into allies or enemies. The question is whether I am to remain king of the 7 kingdoms or become king of 6. No one dared speak first. Ser Barristan Selmy's gaze slid to the king, then to Daenerys, then back. Ser Jorah stood by a column, arms folded, his expression guarded. A hush settled until Daenerys finally spoke. "The North stands on the precipice of winter. They need our grain, but they also will not yield unless they feel safe from tyranny. If we cannot offer them that sense of security, they will resist. And they are determined enough to fight, even starve, if they believe they are fighting for their freedom." Viserys inhaled slowly, then looked at Lord Vaemond Valerion, who had been quietly tapping his fingers on the table. "Lord Vaemond, speak your mind." Vaemond leaned forward. "Your Grace, there is precedent for partial independence in times of crisis. House Martell of Dorne once maintained considerable autonomy before they joined with the Targaryens. But that was after the conquest, and it still required centuries of negotiation and marriages to unite the realm. The question is how dearly you value the immediate unity of the 7 kingdoms versus the risk of plunging us all back into war. Perhaps a new approach is warranted. Let the North rule itself under its chosen king. so long as it pays tribute or offers military support when required. That way, you remain the apex of power in Westeros, but you acknowledge the North's unique status. A few counselors seemed to shift uneasily at the idea of a king in the North. Viserys swallowed. His father, the Mad King, would have raged at such talk. But Viserys was not his father, or so he prayed. He turned his gaze to Daenerys. Do you support this notion of partial independence? She studied him carefully. I believe it could be the best path for peace. The realm needs time to heal. Holding it together by iron will alone might break it further. Viserys nodded, his teeth setting. Then I want a carefully worded treaty drafted. The North will remain part of our alliance, but Stark can style himself king in the North if that must be, provided he acknowledges the Targaryen crown as the primary seat of Westeros. A joint agreement of trade and defense. Should the North be attacked, we respond. Should the rest of the realm be attacked, they respond. And we ensure shipments of grain to help them survive the winter. He paused, feeling his heart pound. But let it be clear that if Stark oversteps, we will not hesitate to remind him that the Targaryen king is still the central authority. A murmur of approval and some relief spread through the council. Daenerys exhaled softly, and Viserys wondered if she was proud of him for bending as far as he had. He bristled at that thought. He was not seeking her approval like a child. He was making an adult decision for the realm. Still, beneath the bristle was an odd warmth that she might see him acting with the wisdom she so often championed. The council adjourned at first light, with scribes set to drafting the official terms. Robb Stark was summoned to the throne room soon after, appearing in a simple tunic and cloak of gray wool, a sigil of the direwolf pinned at his breast. His posture was stiff, watchful. Viserys watched him approach and wondered if you were deep down, they might have respected one another under different circumstances. Both had lost much, both had been thrust into positions of leadership at a young age. Viserys stood before the Iron Throne, not seated this time. He wanted to look Stark in the eye. His king guard flanked him. Daenerys stood behind his right shoulder, silent. Lord Stark, Viserys began, carefully omitting the address of king. For the moment, after much consideration, I am prepared to offer terms that will secure the peace between North and South. You will maintain your own rule in the North with the style of king if you must, but you will be aligned with the Targaryen throne as allies. You will acknowledge me as the chief sovereign of Westeros, and in exchange, I will provide trade in grain and goods to sustain your people through the coming winter. We will defend each other against any foreign or domestic threat. Should we find ourselves at odds, we will negotiate before drawing swords. Is this acceptable to you? A hush followed. Robb Stark's gaze flicked over the courtiers to Daenerys, then back to Viserys. I can accept those terms, he said, voice level. We sought freedom from tyranny, not from friendship. If the Targaryen crown is prepared to grant us that freedom, then I swear to uphold this alliance in good faith. Viserys inclined his head, his throat constricting with a dozen conflicting emotions, relief, unease, lingering pride. Let it be done then. We will sign and seal the treaty in the sight of the realm. Robb Stark nodded. I agree, he said. The official signing took place later that day in the Red Keep's presence chamber. Wax seals were pressed into hot red wax, sigils were set side by side, the three-headed dragon and the gray direwolf. When it was finished, the tension in the air finally eased. Robb Stark lingered in King's Landing for a short while, accepting the king's hospitality, though there was little warmth between them. On the eve of his departure, Daenerys invited him to a small gathering in her solar. Viserys heard of it and decided, somewhat impulsively, that he would join as well, to see what passed between them without the formalities of court. He arrived to find them speaking quietly on a balcony overlooking the Blackwater. Robb's younger sister, Sansa Stark, was also present, having traveled with him. Sansa, a girl on the cusp of womanhood, was listening to Daenerys with rapt attention while Daenerys described a memory of her travels in Essos. Robb's expression was guarded, but he seemed respectful toward Daenerys. Viserys felt like an intruder in a moment of softer diplomacy, yet he stepped into the lamplight all the same, announcing his presence with a polite cough. Daenerys greeted him with a small dip of her head. Robb turned and inclined his head, adopting a more formal tone. Your Grace. Viserys approached. I thought to see how our guests fare on their final night in the city. He glanced at Sansa, who lowered her eyes demurely. She looked frightened or at least deeply shy. He attempted a gentler tone. I hope King's Landing has not been too unpleasant for you, my lady. Sansa mustered a small smile. "It is grander than I ever imagined, Your Grace, though the crowds can be overwhelming." "They overwhelm me too," Daenerys said, smiling kindly. "I find it helps to imagine them all as individuals with their own stories rather than a faceless mass." Robb gave a faint, approving nod at that. He turned to Viserys. "Your sister has been gracious in telling us of her experiences. It is humbling to think all that House Targaryen has endured since the rebellion. Perhaps if history had taken a different turn, none of this strife would have come to pass." Viserys' chest tightened. "History is seldom kind," he replied. "We can but shape the future." An uneasy lull followed. Daenerys broke the silence by offering them wine from a silver pitcher on the table beside her. They accepted, sipping quietly. Viserys felt a strange, delicate sense of camaraderie in that moment, as though the forging of alliances might indeed be possible if all parties laid down old hostilities. He caught Daenerys' eye and thought he glimpsed relief there that he had chosen a path of negotiation rather than war. The flicker of a small smile passed between them, a silent bridge. Soon after, the Starks departed, heading back to the north. Word spread through King's Landing that the Targaryen king had made a bold compromise, and though many grumbled that it was a sign of weakness, others praised the measure as an act of wisdom. The small folk in Flea Bottom muttered they had little care who ruled as long as bread remained affordable, and that perhaps there would be no new rebellion to plague their streets. Some noble houses worried that Viserys had opened a door for further fracturing of the realm, while others breathed easier, relieved that they would not have to muster armies again so soon. Viserys found himself sleepless in those weeks, haunted by the sense that he was losing the grand vision he had once held for a unified Westeros. But whenever he saw Daenerys among the people or heard the faint laughter of children in the Red Keep's courtyards, he told himself that perhaps compromise was not defeat, but the first step toward a more lasting reign. Still, doubts festered. If the realm saw him as a king who gave too much away, would they begin to look toward Daenerys as the truer dragon? He had glimpsed how easily she won hearts. A part of him resented her for that, and yet another part of him wanted her by his side, shining that warmth into his own uncertain shadow. One late afternoon, as the sun painted the sky with gold and pink over Blackwater Bay, Viserys ascended to the top of the Red Keep's highest tower for some solitude. The wind tousled his silver-gold hair, and he clutched the battlement. In the distance, ships bobbed at anchor, and seabirds dipped low over the water in search of scraps. He felt the presence of another before he heard footsteps. Turning, he found Daenerys approaching. She wore a simple gown, her hair loose around her shoulders, stirred by the same wind. "I did not mean to intrude," she said softly, "but I saw you climb the stairs. Is something troubling you?" He exhaled, gazing across the sprawling city. "Everything troubles me, sister. Being king is not the glorious thing I imagined." She stepped closer, her voice a gentle hush. "Ruling has its burdens. I have seen it as well." "You have?" he asked, his tone tinged with bitterness he did not entirely intend. A flash of old hurt passed through her violet eyes, but she persevered. "I carried responsibility among the Dothraki. It was not ruling Westeros, but it taught me what it means to be accountable for the lives of those who look to you for guidance. When they hungered, I felt their hunger. When they fell ill, I did what I could to heal them. When they feared, I had to be their courage." Viserys rubbed the back of his neck. "It is different here," he insisted, but the words sounded hollow even to him. "The realm is vast. The lords are proud. Every choice I make is either too strong or too weak." Daenerys gave a small nod. "This city demands so much. But you are not alone, Viserys. You have a council, you have me. You can lean on us." He searched her face. "And yet, sometimes I think the realm would prefer you, not me. A kinder monarch, a breaker of chains, a queen who soothes every wound." She lowered her gaze. "I will not claim I have not heard such whispers, but I have not encouraged them, nor do I crave to tear the crown from you. I only want what's best for our people." He swallowed. A sudden wave of guilt swelled in his chest. "I know I have not always treated you kindly. Across the narrow sea I was angry, desperate. I did things, said things to you. I am ashamed. Yet you stand beside me anyway." Daenerys' eyes glistened. The wind tugged at her hair. "You are my brother," she said simply. "What else can I do?" The raw emotion in her voice unsettled him. He reached out, a tentative gesture, and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Thank you," he whispered, half choked by the swirl of regret and relief. For a moment, the years of hurt, the bitter arguments, the gulf between them, everything seemed to fade. He was left with the fragile understanding that they were the last Targaryens of their line, siblings bound by loss and memory. She gently covered his hand with hers, squeezing lightly. "We should go down," she murmured. "Night is coming." He nodded and allowed her to lead him back inside. As they descended the twisting stair, the torches flickered along the walls, casting dancing shadows across their faces. Viserys felt a flicker of hope that perhaps they could find a middle path. His rule strengthened by her compassion, her influence tempered by his sense of monarchy. Yet under that hope, a quiet fear still waited, for he knew that compromise might not be enough if events conspired to drive them apart. In the weeks that followed, Viserys made a conscious effort to show a gentler face to the realm. He presided over a handful of public audiences, carefully balancing strict justice with measured mercy. He ordered a slight reduction in certain taxes on grain to ease the burdens on small folk battered by bandits and poor harvests. He tasked the crown's forces with clearing the Rose Road of brigands. And he asked Daenerys to organize relief for refugees fleeing some of the war-torn border areas in the Riverlands. Yet as the months wore on, rumors began trickling in from the western seas. The Ironborn, led by Balon Greyjoy, had grown bold. With King Robert's reign ended and the realm's stability in question, the men of the Iron Islands turned raider once again, harrying the coasts of the Reach and the Westerlands. Nobles began sending word to King's Landing, pleading for a royal navy or an army to quell these attacks. Viserys found himself once more in the center of a boiling conflict. House Lannister in particular was demanding swift action, hinting that if the crown could not defend their shores, they would take matters into their own hands. At the small council table, the matter of the Ironborn dominated every discussion. Lord Tywin Lannister had died not long after Robert's fall, leaving Casterly Rock under the control of Jaime Lannister, the erstwhile Kingsguard who had forsaken his vows, or so the rumor said, to inherit his father's seat. Jaime was untested as a lord. Viserys had not forgotten that Jaime Lannister had once served in the Kingsguard under the Mad King and had ended Aerys' life with a sword in the back. Now the Lannisters were sending envoys, bristling at the threat on their coasts. The tension was tangible. If Viserys failed to defend them, the Lannisters might turn seditious. One damp morning, with clouds pressing low over the city, Viserys rode out to inspect the royal fleet anchored along the Blackwater. He took Daenerys with him, along with Ser Jorah and several other knights. The smell of tar and brine clung to the air. The ships bobbed at the docks, an aging force, many vessels from Robert's reign. A few had Targaryen sails hastily sewn, but the reality was plain: the crown's navy was understrength. Rebuilding a mighty fleet would require gold, and the crown was far from flush with coin. They walked along the quays, the wooden planks creaking beneath their boots. A harbor master approached, tugging nervously at his cap. "Your Grace," he said, "our vessels can handle small raids, but if the Iron Fleet comes in force, we'll be outmatched." Viserys frowned. "We will have to assemble a larger force by calling upon loyal lords with ships. Redwyne, Valerion, Celtigar, anyone with a harbor. And if the Lannisters can supply their own galleys, so much the better." Daenerys looked over the rolling water, eyes distant. "It will take time, and time is something the Ironborn rarely grant. Their longships move swiftly, striking at weak points." Viserys gave a curt nod. He felt the weight of another crisis pressing down, threatening the fragile peace. "Then we must move quickly. I will send ravens at once. Lord Valerion has always been close to the Targaryens. His fleet will bolster ours." They returned to the Red Keep, drafting letters and edicts well into the night. Viserys forced himself to remain resolute, drawing upon what he hoped was a dragon's determination. He would not fail this time. He would show the realm that he could be strong when necessary. Yet even as he wrote commands, he worried about the gold to fund this naval expansion, the loyalty of lords uncertain about the crown, and the looming question of how Daenerys would respond if war took an ugly turn. In the weeks that followed, ravens flew, alliances were tested, and shipyards clanged with renewed fervor. Lord Vaemon Valerion, from his seat on Driftmark, promised a dozen ships. A slightly graying Paxter Redwyne from the Arbor pledged a score more. Casterly Rock grudgingly promised some ships to defend their own coastline. The crown scrounged together gold from new loans, unpopular as that was with the Iron Bank of Bravos and the realm's treasurers. Daenerys helped by speaking to traders from Essos, attempting to negotiate lower rates for shipping essential materials for shipbuilding. Still, it was all a race against time. Troubling tidings soon confirmed that Balon Greyjoy's raiders had sacked villages on the coasts of the Reach, carrying off loot and captives. Thrown into a rage, Mace Tyrell demanded that King Viserys punish the Ironborn harshly. Lannister and Tyrell envoys alike demanded action. The king's court bristled with tension, each lord pushing for an immediate offensive. Some even whispered that the Targaryen king was too soft, that the Ironborn would laugh at his half-assembled navy. Viserys responded by dispatching some of the newly mustered ships to intercept raiding parties, but the results were mixed: small skirmishes at sea, minor victories, and the Ironborn still free to vanish into their rocky isles. At last, outraged by the continuing raids, Jaime Lannister informed the crown that the Lannisters would handle the matter themselves if the king could not. That letter arrived on a gray morning, full of veiled threats that a Targaryen king who failed to protect his vassals was no true king at all. Viserys read the letter in private, seething at its tone. He wanted to brand Jaime a traitor and summon him to kneel, but he realized that might spark an open conflict with the Lannisters, something he could ill afford when the realm was already tenuous. The memory of the Mad King's end at Jaime's hands sent a chill down his spine. He would never trust Jaime, but how to proceed? Daenerys found him in the library, pacing between dusty tomes of dragon lore and genealogies. She watched him for a moment, worry on her face. "You're upset." He let out a mirthless chuckle. "The Lannisters are pushing me, testing me. If I do not respond, I look weak. If I respond too harshly, I risk another rebellion." She approached, the hem of her gown trailing on the stone floor. "What if we offer the Lannisters an olive branch? Invite Jaime Lannister to King's Landing to discuss a joint campaign against the Iron Islands." Viserys scoffed. "Invite my father's killer into our midst as a guest? How would that look?" She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You have to show you are above old grudges. Otherwise, the realm will remain locked in a cycle of bitterness. The Lannisters control immense wealth, ships, and soldiers. If we unite our forces, we can crush the Ironborn more swiftly, saving many lives. Then, if Jaime tries anything treacherous, we will deal with him, but at least we will have attempted diplomacy." He stared at her, the memory of the Mad King's final day playing in his mind. Aerys undone by his own tyranny, a betrayal from within his own Kingsguard. That was not Viserys' story, he told himself fiercely. After a long pause, he nodded. "I will consider it." Over the next few days, he wrestled with the decision. Daenerys' logic was sound, but his pride rebelled at extending a hand to Jaime Lannister. In the end, necessity won out. He needed the Lannister support to deal decisively with the Ironborn. A politely worded invitation was sent, though tempered with a reminder that this was the King's Court, and Jaime was expected to show the respect due to House Targaryen. Weeks later, the Lord of Casterly Rock arrived in King's Landing with a retinue of Lannister knights and bannermen. Jaime was still handsome, but there were faint lines at the corners of his green eyes, and his golden hair was cropped shorter than Viserys remembered from court gossip. He bore himself with an air of casual confidence, the famed golden sword at his hip. When he entered the Red Keep's throne room, escorted by the Kingsguard, Viserys felt a stab of unease. This was the man who had ended his father's reign with one swift thrust in the back. Jaime, however, bowed smoothly. "Your Grace, I come as requested. My sister, Queen Cersei in the old days, she is gone, and so is my father. I speak for House Lannister now. We answer your summons." Viserys watched him carefully from the Iron Throne. "Lord Jaime, the Ironborn raids must be dealt with. I intend to launch a full campaign against the Iron Islands, with combined fleets from the Crown, the Reach, the Westerlands, and any other house willing to stand against piracy. Will House Lannister lend its might to this cause?" Jaime inclined his head. "We will. Our galleys await, provided the king commits to a concerted effort. We do not intend to wage a half measure. Strike the Iron Islands with overwhelming force, or don't strike at all." Murmurs rippled through the court. Some recognized the unsubtle demand. Jaime wanted to ensure this was no timid expedition. Viserys' jaw tightened. "So be it," he said. "I will assemble the largest fleet this realm can muster. Lord Valerion and Lord Redwine are already prepared. We will call upon the Stormlands as well. With the Lannisters' contribution, we will have a force the Iron Islands cannot withstand. Jaime's lips curved in a faint smile. Then I look forward to crushing them at your side, your grace. Viserys felt the tang of relief and lingering resentment in equal measure. He glanced at Daenerys, who stood a short distance away in the crowd, her face carefully composed. He wondered what she thought of this uneasy alliance with the Kingslayer, the man who had once sworn oaths to their father, only to break them in the end. But if necessity compelled it, then so be it. The next weeks saw a flurry of preparations. Ships were readied, troops were gathered, and the Red Keep bustled with the logistics of war. Daenerys busied herself organizing supply lines, ensuring the fleet would not starve at sea. Ser Jorah took charge of training new recruits for the Marines who would storm Ironborn shores. Lord Jaime conferred daily with the king, going over strategies. The plan was to converge at Fair Isle, then push onward toward Pike, the Iron Islands sea. Every passing day brought new intelligence of Ironborn movements. Though Balon Greyjoy himself was said to be old and weakened, his son, Victarion, was rumored to be a powerful commander at sea. Another son, Euron, was said to be a wild card, a reaver with no moral compass at all. At last, the day came when King Viserys led the royal fleet from the mouth of the Blackwater. The sight of dozens of ships was a grand spectacle, the Targaryen banner flying on masts, the red wine grapes on others, the golden lion of Lannister on more. The combined might was impressive, though not as large as the leg. Endery Targaryen fleets of old. Daenerys watched from the quay, standing with a retinue of her own. To Viserys' surprise, she stepped forward at the last moment in riding leathers with several Dothraki and Westerosi knights behind her. "I am coming with you," she said simply. Viserys almost refused, fear clenching his chest at the thought of her in a dangerous campaign. But he saw the resolution in her face. "The men will follow you if you stay here," he said, half in jest, half serious. "They might desert me at sea." She smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Then we must both go, so there's no desertion at all." With that, she climbed aboard the flagship, the Fury. Viserys and his main knights followed, while Jaime and his men boarded a Lannister flagship not far off. The wind filled the sails, and the procession of ships slid out onto open waters. Seagulls wheeled overhead, shrieking. King's Landing receded behind them, its red walls and tall towers shrinking into the distance. Viserys stood on the deck, the salt spray in his face, adrenaline and dread mingling in his veins. This would be the first true test of his reign's military might. If he succeeded, perhaps the realm would see him as a decisive king, one capable of protecting his people. If he failed, the Ironborn might run rampant, and the realm's confidence in House Targaryen would evaporate further. The voyage was long, marked by unpredictable currents and occasional storms. The ships rendezvoused off the coast of Fair Isle, where they took on fresh water and reorganized. Jaime Lannister came aboard the Fury for strategy meetings with Viserys, Daenerys, and Lord Valerion. The plan was to split the fleet into two main groups, one to engage the Iron Fleet head-on and the other to circle around, cutting off the Ironborn escape routes. Once the seas were secured, they would land troops on Pike and the surrounding isles, subduing each stronghold. It was a dangerous operation, for the Iron Islands were a maze of rocky inlets and dangerous reefs, perfect for ambushes. Daenerys contributed ideas for ensuring supply lines were maintained. She had some knowledge of seafaring from her time in Essos, though limited. Jaime offered advice on tactics, and while Viserys found it difficult to accept the Kingslayer's counsel, he could not deny that Jaime was skilled in warfare. At night, Viserys lay in his cramped captain's cabin, listening to the groan of timbers, wishing for solid ground. The sense that he was on a knife's edge never left him. Days later, scouts brought news that Ironborn longships had been sighted prowling near the coastline of the Westerlands, perhaps expecting that the Lannister fleet might sail alone. They were in for a surprise when they encountered a combined armada. Viserys ordered the fleet forward, surging north. Soon, the first engagement erupted at sea. A cluster of Ironborn raiders tried to flee upon spotting the imposing line of war galleys, but Viserys' outriders swooped in, capturing or sinking half a dozen ships. A minor victory, but it stoked morale. The Targaryen banner snapped proudly in the sea wind, and men cheered the king's name. The deeper they sailed into Ironborn waters, however, the more dangerous it became. Weather worsened, the seas grew rougher, and men whispered that the drowned god favored his Ironborn children in these waters. Skirmishes broke out sporadically, ironclad raiders darting in under the cover of thick morning fog. One day, a fierce storm battered the fleet, scattering ships and straining rigging. When the skies cleared, a handful of vessels were missing, presumed lost or separated. The strain showed on Viserys, who had never endured such harsh conditions at sea. He found himself leaning heavily on Daenerys, whose calm presence steadied him when the water's endless rocking threatened to overwhelm his nerves. At last, the main battle loomed. They had intelligence that the Iron Fleet under Victorian Greyjoy was massing near the waters south of Pike, ready to meet the invaders. The combined Royal Armada formed up, tension gripping every deck. Viserys stood at the prow of the Fury, robed in black leather, a sword belted at his hip. Daenerys stood near him, her hair braided back from her face. In the distance, through the haze of sea mist, they glimpsed the lines of Iron-born longships, smaller and more maneuverable, but bristling with reavers hungry for plunder. Trumpets sounded across the waves. Drums beat. War cries arose on both sides. The Lannister flagship signaled readiness. Viserys felt his stomach twist. This was it, the moment that might define him in the eyes of the realm. He raised his arm, then let it fall. The Crown's galleys surged forward, sails billowing, oars dipping into the water. A roar of voices echoed across the sea. Chaos reigned as the fleets collided. Longships darted in, grappling with the larger galleys, Ironborn warriors leaping aboard with axes and spears. The royal forces responded with ballista bolts, scorpion shots, and crossbow fire. The air filled with the screams of men, the crash of steel, the splintering of wood. Smoke and flame licked along some decks where wildfire was deployed. The Fury rocked violently as an Ironborn vessel smashed into its flank, reavers swarming up ropes. Viserys shouted orders, fighting off waves of panic. Ser Jorah and other knights defended the king valiantly, hacking down boarders with sword and shield. Daenerys moved amidst the fray with surprising agility, her dagger flashing, though her Dothraki companions did most of the killing to keep her safe. Blood slicked the deck. The sea churned crimson in places. The Ironborn were fierce, chanting, "What is dead may never die," as they charged. Yet the combined might of Westeros was greater, and with every minute more Targaryen and Lannister ships closed in, hammering the Iron Fleet. Some distance away, Jaime Lannister led a contingent that circled behind the main Ironborn line, cutting off escape. Smoke drifted over the water, and the clangor of steel mingled with the howling wind. At one point, a reaver lunged at Viserys, a wicked axe raised. Viserys raised his sword in a clumsy parry, barely deflecting the blow. The shock of it numbed his arm. He stumbled back, heart pounding in his ears. The reaver snarled and attacked again, but Ser Barristan intervened, intercepting the blade with a sure, practiced strike. Viserys scrambled to his feet, swallowing both his fear and a surge of gratitude. Eventually, the Iron Fleet began to waver. Their longships, once outmaneuvering the heavier galleys, found themselves surrounded, the cunning of their ambush failing against the sheer numbers of the allied fleet. As the day wore on, the Targaryen banners held strong and the Ironborn line cracked. Viserys watched with pounding heart as ship after ship either surrendered or was destroyed. The deck of the Fury was littered with bodies, but they had held. A ragged cheer went up from the men still standing, though the battle was not fully over. By nightfall, the sea was littered with debris and the broken hulks of ships. Fires burned on the water where pockets of wildfire still danced green in the darkness. Survivors clung to driftwood. A handful of Ironborn vessels escaped into the gloom, but the majority lay shattered. When dawn came, the Allied fleet had emerged victorious, albeit at a steep cost. Yet the heart of the Iron Fleet was broken. Viserys, exhausted, could barely stand. His legs trembled, not used to the punishing chaos of shipboard battle. Daenerys approached him, face smudged with soot, eyes alight with relief that they were alive. "You did it, brother," she said quietly. "We broke them at sea." He sagged against the railing, letting out a tremulous breath. "We must press on. We must land on the Isles, finish this." She nodded. "We should give our men a day to recover. Then we strike at Pike and the other strongholds." Jaime Lannister rowed over in a small boat, stepping onto the Fury's deck with a limp. His armor was dented and his face bore a shallow cut across the cheek. He gave Viserys a wry grin. "Well fought, your grace. I dare say you've bested the Ironborn in their own waters. That is no small feat." Viserys eyed the golden-haired lord warily, but he forced himself to nod. "We had help," he managed. "Your ships did their part." Jaime chuckled, "The sound weary? I look forward to finishing the job on dry land, if one can call the Iron Islands dry." His gaze flicked to Daenerys, and he inclined his head politely. "Princess, your presence here is notable." Daenerys merely inclined her head in return. "We do what we must." Over the next few days, the Allies landed on the shores of Pike, aided by partial landings on Harlaw, Great Wyke, and Orkmont. The Ironborn fought fiercely amid jagged rocks and narrow beaches, but they lacked the unified might to halt a well-coordinated invasion. Viserys, determined to stamp out piracy, ordered garrisons placed in captured ports. Houses loyal to the crown from the mainland raised their banners on the Iron Islands, though the steep, forbidding terrain made progress slow. Pike itself stood on a cliff, separated by tall stone bridges. The seat of House Greyjoy was carved from the rock, battered by wind and surf. The final assault came at dawn. The combined forces laid siege to the castle while battered Ironborn defenders hurled rocks and spears. Viserys stayed in a command tent on the shore, wanting to coordinate rather than risk his life in the thick of the siege. Daenerys, escorted by her own guard, visited the wounded in a makeshift camp. Jaime Lannister and Ser Jorah Mormont led the main assault. Balon Greyjoy, old and defiant, refused to surrender. But after a day of bombardment with scorpions and grappling hooks, the ramparts were taken. Pike's gates eventually broke under relentless pounding. The allied troops swarmed in, capturing the Great Keep. Balon was found in his hall, slumped on his throne, an axe in one hand. He was too weak to fight, but his glare was full of hatred. Jaime Lannister greeted him with mock courtesy before ordering him placed under guard. That evening, as the war horns fell silent, Pike's ramparts flew the three-headed dragon alongside the Golden Lion. The Iron Islands were subdued. Word spread swiftly across Westeros. King Viserys had led a grand alliance to break the Ironborn. A wave of relief swept the coastlines, especially the Westerlands and the Reach. Lords who had once doubted Viserys' resolve began to reconsider. Even in King's Landing, the small folk spoke of the king's victory at sea, though some insisted that the presence of Daenerys had tipped the scales, that her determination on the deck of the Fury rallied the men. Viserys, for his part, felt an odd mixture of triumph and numbness. Yes, he had secured the realm from a dangerous threat, but the cost in blood was high, and the memory of the carnage at sea haunted his dreams. In the aftermath, Viserys convened a council at Pike to decide the fate of Balon Greyjoy and the Iron Islands. Jaime Lannister, Daenerys, Ser Barristan Selmy, and other officers gathered around a long wooden table in Pike's damp hall. Balon, under guard, was brought forth. He was too frail to stand without support, but his eyes flashed with the pride of iron. Victarion and Euron Greyjoy were nowhere to be found, rumored to have fled or been lost at sea. Viserys looked down at Balon. Your raids have cost thousands of lives and left villages burning. I could have you executed for treason. Balon spat on the ground. Ironborn, do not kneel. Viserys' jaw clenched. He glanced at Daenerys. She was watching with a guarded expression, clearly uneasy about further bloodshed. Jaime Lannister made no secret that he favored execution. Ser Barristan waited silently, his stance grim. Viserys stood, letting the hush build. Balon Greyjoy, you will be confined to your castle under guard for the remainder of your days. The title of Lord of the Iron Islands is forfeit. We will place a royal warden here to ensure you never raise sail again. A murmur of surprise circulated. Some had expected a swift beheading. Balon sneered, but Viserys ignored him. While he wanted to project strength, he had also learned from the example of the North that more bloodshed often led to further uprisings. Better to crush their capacity to wage war and let Balon wither in bitterness than to make a martyr of him. House Greyjoy would be humbled. The Ironborn reavers who refused to bend would be hunted down. Galleys would patrol their waters. In time, perhaps even the Iron Islands could be brought to heel without a cycle of revenge. That night, the wind howled around Pike's towers, rattling shutters and moaning like a wounded beast. Viserys stood on a narrow balcony, the sea crashing far below, foam spraying on the rocks. He shivered in the damp cold. Daenerys found him there, as she often seemed to find him in his most reflective moments. He did not turn when he heard her footsteps. Is it done? He asked softly. She stepped up beside him. Jaime is securing the last pockets of resistance. Our men are weary, but the Ironborn are beaten. He let out a long breath. Then I have succeeded in one battle, at least. She placed a hand on his forearm. You showed strength, brother. You protected the realm. Many will praise you for it. A dry laugh escaped him. And curse me too, no doubt, for the devastation. War is never simple. I'm not sure it's a victory to celebrate when so much blood has stained these shores. Daenerys' face was troubled, but she nodded. True enough. Still, you did what you had to do. And by sparing Balon, you've spared the Iron Islands another wave of grief. It might serve to quell their fervor in time instead of provoking endless vendettas. He turned, meeting her gaze. Moonlight lit her features. Where will you go next? He asked, surprising himself. Part of him feared she would drift away, forging a path of her own. It haunted him that she might leave at the very moment his victory was secured. She blinked. I had not decided. Back to King's Landing with you, I suppose. Unless you wish me elsewhere. A wave of emotion passed through him, some complex blend of gratitude, relief, and worry. I do wish you with me, he admitted quietly. Our rule is stronger together, is it not? She studied his face, then placed a hand gently against his cheek. Yes, I believe it is. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the simple warmth of her touch ground him. Above the roar of the sea, a gull cried out in the night. He remembered how it felt to be in exile, imagining the day he would reclaim the throne, never guessing the price or the complexities that would follow. In the hush of that balcony, it struck him that perhaps he had learned more about ruling in these last months than in all the years of dreaming. And for once, he allowed himself a measure of cautious optimism, believing that, with Daenerys at his side, he might find a balance between the harsh necessity of power and the gentler demands of justice. When they returned to King's Landing, the city greeted them with raucous cheers. Word of the victory preceded them. King Viserys had saved the coast, subdued the Iron Islands, and reasserted Targaryen might on the seas. The Iron Throne, it seemed, was more secure than it had been in decades. Feasts were thrown in the Red Keep, and bards sang songs of the triumphant young king. Nobles from across the crownlands and the Reach flocked to pay homage, seeking royal favor. Even some of the Dornish lords, aloof as ever, sent token gifts to acknowledge the crown's achievement. Yet, as the revelry played out, Viserys could not ignore the shadows. War had emptied parts of the treasury again. New debts were piling up, and the question of succession still lingered. He had no queen, no heir. More than one lord whispered of a marriage alliance that might further cement his hold on the throne. Some suggested a union with Margaery Tyrell, others with Arianne Martell, or even a reconciliation with the Lannisters by taking a suitable bride from Casterly Rock. Viserys bristled at the notion of using marriage as a tool, but he recognized it as a time-honored practice of monarchy. Each approach carried political implications he had to weigh carefully. One evening, after a long round of court audiences, Grand Maester Benatar approached him in the corridor, bowing. "Your Grace, might I have a word?" Viserys nodded wearily, dismissing his attendants to speak in private with the maester. Benatar's soft slippers padded on the marble floor as he led the king into a side chamber where an iron brazier glowed. The old man adjusted his chain of office, each link denoting a discipline of knowledge. "There is a matter of succession, Your Grace," he began gently, "that the council is concerned about. You have no son, no daughter, no wife. Should aught befall you, the realm would be thrown into crisis, perhaps splitting between Princess Daenerys' claim and other potential claimants." Viserys stiffened. "Are you implying I must marry at once?" Benatar dipped his head. "I only relay the council's concerns. I would not presume to order my king's heart. But the realm would be greatly reassured if you took a bride and secured the line of succession." Viserys ground his teeth. "I will consider it, but I will not be rushed." The maester gave a deferential bow. "Of course, Your Grace." And with that, he slipped away, his robes whispering across the threshold. Over the next weeks, Viserys noticed an uptick in visitors bearing daughters of eligible age. The Red Keep's corridors became a pageant of prospective brides. The Tyrell envoy arrived with sweetly scented gifts and subtle praise for House Targaryen's new naval supremacy. A raven from Dorne hinted that Arianne Martell was unwed, her beauty the stuff of rumor. The Vale sent a polite inquiry, though Lady Lisa Arryn was known for her peculiarities and her son was but a child, no bride for the king there, but perhaps a betrothal to strengthen ties. The swirl of possibilities grated on Viserys. He had scarcely enough time to manage the realm without being paraded through a line of noblewomen. One afternoon, Daenerys found him in a foul mood, pacing near the throne. "What troubles you now?" she asked softly. He ran a hand through his hair. "They want me to marry. Everyone from the Tyrells to the Martells to the Lannisters. Each seeking advantage." She tilted her head. "You knew this day would come, brother. The realm does need an heir." He threw up his hands. "I know it. But I can't help feeling like a piece of meat on a butcher's block waiting for the highest bidder. I have no illusions that any of these houses truly care for me. They care for power." Daenerys nodded. "Perhaps that is the nature of royal marriage. But you can still choose wisely. Find someone who might share your vision, not undermine it." He exhaled. "And if I choose no one? If I remain unwed?" Daenerys' expression grew pained. "Then the realm will remain uncertain. Even if you continue to rule well without a clear line of succession, you risk another war when you die." Viserys stared at the throne's metal steps. He remembered how it felt to live in constant fear of assassins and usurpers, how precarious a crown could be. Reluctantly, he conceded that she was right. "I suppose I must open negotiations." "But with whom?" he asked, almost plaintively. She hesitated, then said a union with Dorne could further solidify the realm. Arianne Martell is rumored to be strong-willed and intelligent. Or Margaery Tyrell if you want a closer tie to the Reach. If you PR. Effort to strengthen the Western Alliance, a Lannister match is possible, though that might bring old resentments to the fore. She gave a faint, sad smile. No easy choice. He eyed her. "What would you advise, sister?" She paused, looking genuinely torn. Dorne has always been patient. They still remember Elaya's fate. A marriage to Arianne might finally heal that wound and bring Dorne fully into the fold, especially now that you have proven your willingness to compromise. The Reach, however, holds great wealth and farmland crucial for feeding the realm. Margaery Tyrell is well-liked, known to be gracious and politically shrewd. But the Tyrells can be overbearing. As for the Lannisters, you already have a fragile alliance with Jaime. A marriage there might tie you to a dangerous family more closely than you want. But perhaps it would keep them from turning on you. Viserys rubbed his temples. All these choices and none are perfect. She gave him a sympathetic look. Nothing in ruling is perfect. The question is simply which path is best. He sighed, gesturing for her to follow him out of the throne room. "Walk with me," he said, leading her down a corridor lined with stained glass windows. They passed guards who bowed. A hush hung between them, the weight of possibility pressing in. At length, Viserys said, I think I will consider the Tyrell match first. Highgarden is central, wealthy, and Margaery's reputation might help soften the realm's view of me. If that fails, I'll look to Dorne." Daenerys nodded, but he sensed her hesitation. "Then I wish you wisdom in your negotiations," she said quietly. "I know Mace Tyrell can be a blowhard, but if Margaery is truly as clever and kind as they say, it may be to your advantage. Your own wedding might follow soon, no doubt," Viserys said wryly, surprising them both with the sudden shift of subject. "Surely the realm will wonder if you will marry some powerful lord." She lowered her gaze. "I've not given it much thought." He recalled rumors that certain lords had been quietly courting her attention, from the Vale to the Reach, even the Stormlands. Her beauty and lineage were enough to tempt many. But he was strangely protective of her, not wanting to see her used as a mere pawn. He squeezed her hand and said nothing further, letting the subject drop, for the tension in her eyes was clear. A formal invitation was sent to Highgarden, proposing a meeting to discuss a prospective match. Mace Tyrell eagerly responded, promising to arrive in King's Landing with his daughter Margaery for a grand feast and negotiation. In anticipation, the Red Keep bustled with preparations. Tapestries were aired, tables laid with fresh cloth. The city braced itself for the Tyrell retinue, known for its extravagance. When they arrived, wagons of flowers, fresh produce, and gifts poured through the gates, perfuming the air with the sweet scent of the Reach's bounty. Viserys received them in the throne room, wearing his finest black doublet embroidered with the red dragon. Mace Tyrell was a broad-shouldered, ruddy-faced man, sporting a plumed hat and a beaming smile. Beside him stood Margaery Tyrell, slender and poised, with brown hair woven into an elegant arrangement, her eyes bright and inquisitive. She curtsied deeply before the king, and he inclined his head in greeting. Daenerys observed from a distance, studying every subtle nuance. Introductions led to polite courtesies, and soon they were feasting in the vast hall of the Red Keep. Music played, and the guests were treated to succulent fruits, roasted game, and sweet arbor wine. Mace Tyrell waxed poetic about Highgarden's fertility, praising the king's victory over the Ironborn. Viserys nodded politely, though the man's verbosity wearied him. Margaery, on the other hand, listened and spoke in measured phrases, occasionally meeting Viserys' gaze with a calm smile that suggested she was gauging his every word. During a lull in the music, Margaery ventured, "Your Grace, I have heard much of your sister's efforts to aid the small folk and bring a gentler hand to governance. It gladdens me to see House Targaryen once more concerned for the welfare of the realm." Viserys cast a glance at Daenerys, who sat further down the table. "Yes, she has a gift for that," he said, uncertain if Margaery's praise was genuine or a cunning gambit. "And are you similarly inclined, my lady?" A spark lit Margaery's eyes. "I believe that a ruler must be loved as well as respected. The small folk are not tools to be used and cast aside. They are our strength." Viserys considered her words. She seemed earnest, or at least very skilled at portraying earnestness. He recalled Daenerys had once said something similar, that compassion could unify the realm more effectively than fear. The king found himself softening to Margaery's presence. She was attractive, graceful, and politically astute. If a marriage alliance could help stabilize the kingdom, perhaps it would not be so terrible. Over the next few days, negotiations proceeded in private with Mace Tyrell and his advisors. Dowry details, terms of alliance, conditions of inheritance, all the minutiae of a royal betrothal. Viserys forced himself to endure the tedium, reminding himself that this was the cost of rule. At the same time, he spent hours in conversation with Margaery, testing her intelligence, gleaning glimpses of her personality. He found her witty, composed, and apparently eager to forge a partnership for the good of the realm. Whether she truly cared for him personally, he could not tell, but her courtesy never wavered. Daenerys, observing from the periphery, offered her own insights. Margaery is adaptable, liked by the people, and not easily rattled, she told Viserys quietly one afternoon, after seeing Margaery speak with the Red Keep servants in a friendly manner. She has a knack for making allies. Viserys nodded. Then perhaps she's the right choice. He paused. You're not upset, are you? She looked at him in mild surprise. Why would I be upset? He shrugged, feeling a twinge of awkwardness. We've always been so close, at least in our own complicated way. This will mean changes at court and in our dynamic. Daenerys hesitated, then smiled faintly. I want you to be happy and secure, Viserys. A good match might bring both. He relaxed somewhat, though a lingering worry tugged at him. His father's madness had once driven a wedge between family members. Now, with the possibility of a new queen, would Daenerys find her own role diminished, or would she slip away entirely, seeking her own path? Within a fortnight, a formal agreement was reached. King Viserys would wed Margaery Tyrell before the harvest's end. The Tyrells promised a substantial dowry in gold and provisions. Highgarden would reaffirm its loyalty to the Targaryen crown, ensuring mutual defense and trade benefits. The day the betrothal was announced, lords and ladies gathered in the throne room, applauding politely. Margaery stood beside Viserys, her slim hand resting on his arm, a practiced smile brightening her features. Daenerys observed from a few paces behind, alongside Ser Jorah and Ser Barristan. Though she, too, smiled, Viserys wondered if some hidden sadness lingered in her heart. Preparations for the royal wedding commenced at once. The city bustled with excitement. Weddings always provided a chance for feasts, tournaments, and lavish displays. Sellers hawked commemorative trinkets, and the gold cloaks worked overtime to keep the streets orderly. Mace Tyrell strutted about, offering opinions on every detail, from the floral arrangements to the menu for the wedding feast. Viserys let him have his say, though some part of him longed for simpler times, if such times had ever existed for him. As the day approached, an undercurrent of tension snaked through the Red Keep. Not all were pleased. Certain lords, perhaps those with daughters who had hoped to marry the king, quietly fumed. Others worried that Mace Tyrell's influence would eclipse theirs. Yet overall, the realm seemed to welcome the union, seeing it as a sign of stability. Viserys tried to keep calm, telling himself that this was a moment to cement his claim and bring peace. He took solace in Daenerys' continued support, though her presence at times felt more distant. She was often out in the city, or meeting with envoys from Essos, or conferring with a growing group of loyal knights. On the eve of the wedding, Viserys found himself in the godwood of the Red Keep, beneath the great oak draped in lanterns. The hush of leaves in the evening breeze calmed him. The wedding cloaks were finished, the final preparations made. Tomorrow he would stand beside Margaery Tyrell and speak the vows of House Targaryen and House Tyrell joined. He wondered if Rhaegar Targaryen, his long-dead elder brother, had felt such a swirl of anticipation and dread before his own nuptials. A sadness pressed in at the memory of how Rhaegar's life had ended. A sadness for all that might have been. A soft sound broke his reverie. He turned to see Daenerys, candlelight caught in her silver hair. She approached quietly, her eyes searching his face. He gave her a wan smile. "Come to wish me well on the morrow?" She nodded. "Yes, if you'll have my wishes." He exhaled, some tension slipping from his shoulders. "I will." Feels strange, though. This was never part of the dream I had as a boy, scraping by in Essos. Daenerys' gaze flicked to the candlelit branches overhead. Dreams seldom match our reality, but that doesn't mean reality can't be good. He thought of Marjorie's gentle confidence, her soft laughter, and the gracious way she navigated politics. Perhaps she would be a good queen. "I hope so," he murmured. Daenerys reached out and took his hand. "I am proud of how far you've come, brother. Truly, you have not repeated our father's cruelties. You have bent when necessary and stood firm when it mattered. You are forging a new Targaryen legacy." Emotion clogged Viserys' throat. He turned, squeezing her hand, recalling how fragile their bond once was, how he had shouted at her in their youth, driven by fear and resentment. Now here she stood, unwavering. "And you," he said, voice thick, "have been half of that forging, Dany. I couldn't have done this without you." She gave him a sad, sweet smile. "Then perhaps tomorrow, when you kneel before the Seven or the old gods and vow to take Marjorie as your wife, you can think of it as a new dawn for both of us. We Targaryens have survived so much. Maybe now we can truly live." He blinked away a hint of tears, leaning in to press a light kiss to her brow. For once, no anger, no jealousy twisted inside him. Only gratitude for the sister he had taken for granted for so long. The rustling leaves seemed to whisper blessings on the night air. Morning brought the wedding day, bright, with a high blue sky over King's Landing. The city was in festival mode, garlands of flowers strung across the streets, music drifting through the gates. Lords and ladies crowded the Red Keep's grand sept for the ceremony. Viserys wore a tunic of black velvet, the Targaryen sigil embroidered in shining thread, and a cloak of crimson brocade that Marjorie would soon fasten about her shoulders. The bride arrived in a procession of Tyrell retainers, clad in a gown of ivory lace trimmed with green, her hair woven with tiny golden roses. She looked radiant, a picture of regal composure. Daenerys stood among the honored family, though Targaryen tradition was shorthanded. She wore a simpler gown in pale blue, stepping back so Marjorie would command the attention. The sept was thick with the scents of incense and fresh roses, the windows ablaze with sunlight. All eyes turned to the king as he took Marjorie's hands before the altar, the high septon intoning the ancient words. Viserys felt a flutter in his gut, a mixture of uncertainty and resolve. Marjorie's gaze was steady, a small, comforting smile lifting the corner of her lips. The vows were spoken in the sight of gods and men, binding House Targaryen and House Tyrell. Viserys placed a ring on Marjorie's finger. She fastened the king's cloak over her own shoulders, the red and black fabric a symbol that she was now under his protection and bound to his cause. Applause rose, echoing against the high ceilings. Outside, the city roared in celebration as word spread that the king was wed. A lavish feast followed, replete with an endless array of courses: roasted swan, spiced honey wine, fresh berry tarts. Mummers performed, singers sang the glories of House Targaryen, and the newlyweds sat at the high table receiving well wishes. Marjorie deftly charmed the assembled lords with compliments and sly humor, bridging alliances with a smile here and a light jest there. Viserys caught Daenerys's eye once or twice across the throng. She gave him a reassuring nod each time, and he felt less alone in the swirling pomp. Late into the night, when the revelry began to fade, the ceremonial bedding loomed. Lords and ladies shouted bawdy jokes as they escorted the bride and groom to the wedding chamber, a tradition Viserys found discomfiting. Yet Marjorie handled it with grace, smiling at the banter, though it clearly wasn't her preference either. The doors to the chamber closed behind them, shutting out the leering crowd. Alone at last, husband and wife faced each other in a circle of candlelight. Viserys let out a trembling breath. Marjorie regarded him softly, no trace of mockery in her eyes. "We can take this slowly," she offered, "if you prefer." He nodded, grateful for her kindness. The hush of the moment enveloped them. By morning's light, they emerged as king and queen in truth, though Viserys' heart still beat with caution. A wedding might seal a political alliance, but trust was a journey, not a single night's act. In the weeks that followed, Marjorie quickly integrated into court life. She organized charitable events, oversaw improvements to the Red Keep's gardens, and showed interest in continuing Daenerys' works of mercy among the poor. The people responded well to their new queen's graciousness, calling her the Rose of the Red Keep. Meanwhile, Daenerys' presence shifted in the background, though she remained a central figure in certain matters of state. Viserys worried that his sister might feel overshadowed by the new queen, but she never gave any outward sign of jealousy. If anything, Marjorie and Daenerys seemed to find common ground in their shared desire to uplift the small folk. Yet beneath the pleasant facade, the court was a web of competing factions. Those loyal to the Tyrells now vied with older Targaryen loyalists, with Lannister supporters also in the mix. Viserys spent many evenings in anxious strategy sessions with Margaery, Daenerys, and Ser Barristan, trying to balance these rivalries. At times, he longed for the simpler days of exile, but quickly reminded himself that those days had been anything but simple. He was king now, and that meant the realm's burdens were his to shoulder. As time passed, Margaery hinted at the hope of a royal heir. The realm likewise whispered for news that the queen might be with child. Nothing would secure the Targaryen line more firmly than a new generation. Viserys found himself both hopeful and terrified at the thought of fatherhood. Every day, the courtiers examined Margaery's face for signs of pregnancy, though she herself maintained a patient composure. One mild autumn afternoon, as golden leaves drifted in the Red Keep's gardens, Margaery walked with Daenerys by a reflecting pool, discussing a new hospital for the poor in Flea Bottom. Viserys watched from a short distance, reflecting on how fortune had turned. He had once wandered penniless in a foreign land, dreaming of revenge. Now he was king, with a gentle queen and a sister who had become a beloved figure in her own right. A wave of gratitude washed over him, mingled with the persistent knowledge that all fortunes could be undone in the blink of an eye. His reflection in the water looked older than the man he remembered, more careworn. But there was a certain solidity in his posture now, a sense of belonging to the crown he wore rather than merely gripping it like a beggar. He recalled the lessons learned through compromise with the North, the forging of alliances, the victory over the Ironborn. Each step had taught him that a true king had to balance might with mercy, tradition with adaptation, pride with humility. He suspected he had many more lessons to learn, yet he was no longer afraid of them. Perhaps that was what set him apart from Aerys the Mad King, the willingness to learn rather than cling to paranoia. A soft laugh drew his attention. Margaery and Daenerys were smiling over some anecdote. For a moment, Viserys felt a warm surge of hope that a lasting peace might truly be possible, that House Targaryen could thrive once more, not as tyrants but as protectors. The sunlight caught Margaery's hair and Daenerys' silver locks, blending gold and silver in a picture so serene it felt like a painting from a storybook. He knew reality was far more complicated, but he allowed himself the moment of optimism nonetheless. Yet fate always finds ways to test even the sturdiest alliances. Rumors began creeping in from Essos carrying the name of a new warlord rising in the east, or fleets moving in the summer sea. Whispers spoke of rebellions stirring in the Stormlands under restless younger lords who resented the Tyrells' influence at court. The Ironborn might simmer, subdued but not extinguished. The smallfolk could turn in an instant if famine struck. And there was still the question of Daenerys' personal ambitions. She claimed to support her brother wholeheartedly, yet she had once confessed she could not follow him if he became a tyrant. Though he had done his best to avoid that path, destiny had a way of testing every vow. But in that moment, with the garden bathed in autumn light, Viserys Targaryen allowed himself a fragile peace. He had done what many believed impossible. He had claimed the Iron Throne, held it, and begun to knit the realm back together, with Daenerys at his side and now Margaery as his queen. The challenges were endless, but for the first time he felt he stood on firm ground, no longer the beggar king, no longer the frightened child overshadowed by the ghost of a mad father. He was Viserys of House Targaryen, king of Westeros, forging a future out of compromise and courage. And though the realm might one day test him beyond imagination, for now, at least, he had found the beginnings of a legacy that might endure. The autumn air in King's Landing turned crisp and dry in the weeks following Viserys and Margaery's wedding, and the city, once alive with celebratory bustle, gradually settled back to its everyday rhythms. The banners from Highgarden, bright with gold roses, still hung in certain corners of the Red Keep, and the hallways carried the lingering perfume of last night's feast. Servants bustled about, clearing remnants of flower garlands and leftover candles. In the royal apartments, Margaery and Viserys dined quietly, the new queen politely inquiring after her husband's plans for the week, while Viserys tried to push away the fatigue that clung to him like a persistent shadow. He was happy in a reserved, cautious sense, grateful that Margaery's presence brought the realm a step closer to unity. Yet behind his smile, a constant hum of tension warned him that peace in Westeros was as fleeting as dew under the sun. Daenerys slipped in and out of the public eye, still a vital presence but no longer the only female Targaryen figure. In court, she and Margaery had formed a cordial relationship. Both recognized how much the small folk seemed to adore them, and each understood the advantage of goodwill. More than once, they were seen walking together through the gardens, discussing everything from charitable foundations to the tenuous state of trade with the free cities. Viserys watched them with mingled relief and a faint, perplexing ache. The girl who had once been his timid sister had grown into a quietly formidable figure, one whose reputation in the city sometimes rivaled or even surpassed that of the newly crowned queen. Yet it did not appear to breed jealousy in Marjorie. Instead, the two women seemed almost complementary, their empathy and generosity creating a gentle synergy that cast the king in a softer light. It was exactly the kind of arrangement he once would have dreamed of. Yet outside the Red Keep's walls, the cracks in that dream slowly widened. Patrols returned from the Stormlands with whispered accounts of seditious talk among younger lords who resented Tyrell influence in court. Old rivalries festered. The more strident members of House Baratheon's extended bloodline, scattered now after Robert's death, grumbled that Storm's End deserved more say in the king's councils. The surviving children of Stannis, hunkered down at Dragonstone, had no love for King Viserys, regarding him as a usurper of Robert's line. Though they lacked open power or popular support, they nursed ancient grudges that might coalesce in time. Rumors reached the capital that young lords in Tarth, Haystack Hall, and Summerhall were convening in secret gatherings, forging alliances that might one day challenge the crown. Worse, unsettling news from the east threaded its way through the port. Merchant ships docking in King's Landing brought stories of a new Dothraki warlord rampaging across the Red Waste, forging alliances with smaller Khalasars left leaderless over the years. The name Khal Zavo came up in hushed conversation, a man said to be cunning and unusually well-versed in foreign trade. He had evidently come into possession of certain resources that gave him a broader vision than typical raiders. More cryptic were rumors of Sellsword companies massing in Volantis, or a shadowy figure with an iron crown haunting the stepstones. Nobody could confirm any of it, but the pervasive sense of tension drifted like a haze through the city. Viserys tried to focus on what he could control. The crown had to remain firm but just. Tax reforms required refinement if the capital was to feed its ballooning populace. With Marjorie's guidance, some relief was given to farmers battered by brigand raids in the Riverlands. The king ordered roads repaired, especially in the Crownlands, so that trade would flow more efficiently. Alongside these practical matters came the gentle buzz of hopes for an heir. Courtiers discreetly watched Queen Marjorie for any sign of pregnancy, but though she remained in robust health, there was no immediate announcement. Grand Maester Benatar assured them that it might take time, that nothing was amiss in a young marriage. Even so, the hush of speculation dogged the corners of every gathering. When winter's first chill threatened to creep down from the north, the king convened his small council. Seated around the table were Lord Vaemond Valerion, Grand Maester Benatar, Ser Barristan Selmy, Ser Jorah Mormont, and Daenerys. The queen joined them as well, observing with quiet attentiveness. The tapestry of Westeros hung on one wall, a map dotted with small flags to indicate trouble spots or alliances. Viserys rested his fingertips on the table, the flickering candlelight revealing lines of tension in his brow. The Stormlands are restless, he stated, voice steady but tinged with impatience. Reports say Lord Selwyn Tarth may be harboring certain members of the old Baratheon loyalists. Nothing overt, yet no open rebellions. But subtle discontent can ignite easily. Lord Vaemond, his Valyrian-touched hair braided at the nape of his neck, drummed his fingers on the tabletop. If we push them too hard, we might spark a conflict. Perhaps we should dispatch an envoy, someone with enough clout to soothe ruffled feathers. Marjorie offered a mild suggestion. A tour of the Stormlands by royal representatives might serve. Show them the crown has not forgotten them. Her gaze flicked to Daenerys, then to Viserys. In my own experience, seeing problems firsthand can quell resentment. Viserys nodded, considering. He glanced at Daenerys. Sister, would you be willing to go? People there speak well of you, or so I've heard. Your presence might quell fears that the crown is ignoring the Stormlands. Daenerys' expression was thoughtful. If you believe my presence would help, I will go, she said. Though I'd prefer to bring an armed escort in case the rumors of hidden discontent prove true. Ser Barristan inclined his head. I'd send at least half a dozen knights, and we can spare a contingent of gold cloaks to ensure her safety. Viserys tapped the table. Yes, do so. But keep it a modest retinue. We don't want to look like we're invading. Show enough strength to command respect but not to provoke hostilities. Daenerys smiled slightly, as though relieved to do something more purposeful than watch the shifting moods of the capital. I understand. I'll depart within a week. In the subsequent days, Daenerys made arrangements for her journey. Ser Jorah, naturally, would accompany her, along with a small cadre of knights and Dothraki loyalists who still followed her. She often handpicked them, trusting them to maintain discipline. Meanwhile, Marjorie worked with the maids and seamstresses to ensure that Daenerys traveled with suitable finery and gifts to present to the Stormland lords, hoping to soften their stance. The queen displayed no jealousy at Daenerys' assignment. If anything, she appeared quietly supportive, aware that each of them had roles to play in stabilizing the realm. Still, there were a few courtiers who whispered that sending Daenerys away was a subtle means of removing her from the capital, an attempt by the new queen or even the king to prevent Daenerys from overshadowing them. Daenerys ignored such gossip, but it lingered like a stale odor in the Red Keep's corridors. One cool morning, with the sun just breaching the horizon, Daenerys and her retinue rode out through the city gates. Viserys stood on the battlements, arms folded against the chill, and watched her small column vanish beyond the winding streets. Margaery joined him, placing a warm fur cloak around his shoulders. He turned to her with a grateful nod. Beneath them, the city began to awaken, merchants setting up stalls, fishermen hauling the night's catch to the markets. A few passers-by noticed the king and queen above, pointing or bowing. Viserys felt Margaery's hand slip into his, and though it was a small gesture, it steadied him somehow. "Do you worry for her?" Margaery asked gently. Viserys exhaled. "Always. We've been at odds for so much of our lives, but she's my sister, the last of my blood besides me. I want her safe." Margaery's gaze drifted toward the distant horizon. "She can handle herself, I think. She's proven that more than once." He nodded, remembering the battles at sea, the negotiations in Dorne. "Yes, she can. Still, I've a sense the Stormlands might not be as placid as we hope." In truth, Daenerys felt that same apprehension. The journey south was peaceful enough for the first several days. The roads snaked through rolling farmland, then skirted patches of woodland as they neared the Stormlands border. A persistent wind tugged at cloaks and banners as though warning them of the region's legendary tempests. Daenerys rode at the head of the column, Ser Jorah at her side, the gold cloaks falling in behind. Her Dothraki, though few, cast an exotic silhouette against the dull browns and greens of autumn foliage, their arcs sheathed but always at the ready. They passed small villages whose inhabitants peered out from doorways. Some recognized the silver-haired princess from her public works in King's Landing and bowed. Others seemed more suspicious, uncertain what a Targaryen presence meant for them. Daenerys stopped often, requesting that Ser Jorah distribute coin to help with any shortfalls in supplies or ensuring that the men purchased food and lodging fairly instead of requisitioning it. She found that it eased tensions. By the time they reached the fringes of Tarth, the local peasants were warily friendly. A few even came out to wave them on, curiosity overcoming fear. Yet as they pushed deeper toward Storm's End, the atmosphere turned heavier. The forest roads were poorly tended, some littered with fallen branches. Local lords' men might appear suddenly at a ridge, watchful, suspicious, then vanish just as quickly. More than once, Daenerys asked Ser Jorah to hail them, only to receive curt replies or silence. Something in the Stormlands simmered as though an undercurrent of resentment was building, ready to break upon the realm like a storm wave. When at last they reached the imposing fortress of Storm's End, perched on the edge of the sea with towering walls that had defied countless assaults, Daenerys tried to make a gracious entrance. She had sent word ahead of her visit, and the gate swung open slowly, revealing a courtyard where a small party of knights and servants awaited. At their heads stood Ser Court A. Penrose, a loyal bannerman to House Baratheon, though the line of Baratheon heirs had grown murky after Robert and Stannis. Ser Court bowed stiffly, then gestured for Daenerys to dismount. She did so with regal composure, accepting his formal greeting. "Welcome to Storm's End, Princess," Ser Court said. The wind whipped across the courtyard, rustling the banners overhead. "I trust your journey was safe?" "Well enough," Daenerys replied. "I come at my brother's behest to see how the Stormlands fare. May we speak within?" He hesitated, then forced a polite nod. "Of course. The castle is at your disposal, Princess." She followed him through the thick walls and broad corridors into the Great Hall. Storm's End's architecture was austere and functional, lacking the ornamentation of more lavish seats like Highgarden or the Red Keep. Stone walls soared upward and narrow windows let in streams of cool light. A scattering of courtiers and household knights watched from a distance, their expressions uneasy. Daenerys kept her own guard close, though she made every effort to appear courteous. Once they were seated at a long table, servants brought out fresh bread, stewed fish, and dark ale. Daenerys thanked them, then turned to Ser Court A. "I will be traveling to several strongholds in the Stormlands to ascertain their needs. We have heard rumors of unrest. My brother the king wishes to assure all that the crown stands ready to address grievances." Ser Court studied her, lines of worry on his brow. "I mean no offense, Princess, but the Stormlands have lost much in recent wars. We saw King Robert's rebellion, we saw the fall of Stannis, and we have not forgotten how the Targaryen line was once the object of that uprising. Some lords remember the old days bitterly." Daenerys managed a small, patient smile. House Targaryen has changed, Ser Courtney. My brother seeks no tyranny. We've made peace with the North, brokered alliances across the realm, ended the Ironborn threat. If there are concerns, we want to hear them. He glanced around the hall, clearly aware of listening ears. Some might say the crown has grown too close to the reach, he said carefully, choosing his words like stepping stones in a raging river. With Queen Marjorie being a Tyrell, certain storm landlords wonder if we'll be overshadowed. Daenerys nodded. I understand the fear. But rest assured, the king's aim is to keep every region fairly represented. The Tyrells are allies, not overlords. They spoke for another hour, going through the standard pleasantries, exchanging small tokens of courtesy. But Daenerys sensed a reticence in Ser Courtney's tone, as though he was holding back. She pressed gently, trying to glean if there were specific complaints from particular lords. He only hinted that there was talk of a figure, perhaps from the old Baratheon line or a self-styled champion, who was stirring local pride against what they saw as an encroaching crown. She gleaned no name, no direct accusation. When they finally parted ways for the evening, Daenerys retreated to the guest chambers assigned to her, a massive stone room with narrow windows. Ser Jorah soon joined her to share observations. They're uneasy, he said, but I can't tell if it's a real threat or just prideful talk. The Stormlands always had a fierce loyalty to House Baratheon. Daenerys set aside her traveling cloak. Loyalty that might be wavering now that none of the Baratheon brothers remained to lead them. Tommen was rumored to be a Baratheon, but the realm knows the truth of his parentage. And with Robert's bastards scattered, the line is uncertain. Still, the Stormlands might latch on to any name that resonates with Robert's legend. Ser Jorah nodded. We must tread carefully. One spark could ignite a rebellion, though it might be small at first. If you bring them an olive branch, they might accept it. But if they read your presence as a threat, then we'll have more than talk to worry about, Daenerys finished, letting out a weary sigh. I'll plan a tour to Haystack Hall and Grandview next. Perhaps seeing me among them, listening to their concerns will help. Over the next few days, she did exactly that, traveling in a modest procession to various Stormland seats. Each castle and hall offered guarded hospitality. Some local lords or ladies seemed genuinely open to the crown's attempts at outreach. Others harbored a stony silence, hosting Daenerys but never quite masking their distrust. At Grandview, Lord Grandison politely spoke of cooperating with King Viserys, but his furrowed brow told a different story. At Haystack Hall, Lady Errol all but demanded financial aid and shipments of grain to compensate for Stormland losses in the last war. Daenerys promised to convey these needs to the king, though she knew the crown's coffers were far from overflowing. The undercurrent of tension persisted. In one village, Daenerys overheard a small crowd whispering about a rumored Stormbringer or Stormchild, a figure some believed was Robert's last surviving bastard, hidden away for years but now come to restore Baratheon influence. Daenerys asked discreet questions, but few could say more than hearsay. The name drifted through the region like a half-forgotten song, stirring passions. She recalled how Robert Baratheon had fathered numerous bastards, many rumored to have black hair and a warrior's disposition. Could one of them be old enough and bold enough to rally disenchanted Stormlords? The notion was troubling. All it would take was a charismatic figure, a kernel of truth, and the Stormlands might erupt. Despite the misgivings, Daenerys pressed on, determined to fulfill her mission. At evenings, she would send detailed ravens back to King's Landing, summarizing her findings. She tried to strike a reassuring tone, but she did not hide the fact that the region was on edge. Viserys responded with letters urging her to continue her gentle approach, reminding her that he trusted her judgment. She was gratified by the trust but aware that each passing day might bring new complications. After nearly a fortnight of travel, they moved inland where thick forests and rolling hills gave way to craggy ridges leading toward the Dornish marches. The wind whipped colder here and storms brewed ominously in the leaden skies. One early evening, as Daenerys' party made camp near a stream, the clouds ripped open in a deluge of rain. The men scrambled to set up tents, cursing as the downpour soaked them. Daenerys huddled in her largest tent with Ser Jorah, the Dothraki warriors standing guard outside, their braids dripping. Thunder rumbled overhead. She was poring over a map by lantern light when Ser Jorah, glancing outside, muttered a curse. Moments later, one of her gold cloaks burst in, water streaming from his cloak. Princess, riders approach. They carry no banner. Could be highwaymen. Numbers? She asked, adrenaline quickening. 20, perhaps more. He swallowed, shifting his stance. We have only a few men on patrol in this weather. The rest are scattered, trying to keep the horses calm. Daenerys shot a look at Ser Jorah, who had already grabbed his sword. "We make a stand or we try to negotiate," she asked quietly. Ser Jorah grimaced. "Negotiation, if possible. But these might be bandits or something worse." The tent flaps ripped open and the wind nearly extinguished the lantern. Daenerys pulled on her cloak and stepped out into the torrent, lightning casting wild shadows across the campsite. Her guards formed a tight ring around her. At the edge of their encampment, she glimpsed flickers of torchlight and silhouettes. The sound of splashing hooves and clanking steel filled the air. A voice shouted above the storm, rough-edged. "We seek the silver-haired Targaryen whore who parades herself as a savior." The insulting words echoed off the trees. Ser Jorah's face twisted in anger and he reached for his sword. Daenerys gripped his arm, stopping him from charging. Her heart hammered, but she forced herself to respond calmly. "I am Daenerys Targaryen, sister to the king." "Who speaks?" A flash of lightning revealed a man on horseback, his hair plastered to his skull, face contorted in a sneer. "Name's Torrhen Storm, bastard son of Robert Baratheon," he spat. "I lead these men. We're done bowing to Targaryens. Robert's line should rule the Stormlands." Daenerys' stomach flipped. The rumored Storm Child, or one of them, had found her. She could see at least 15 mounted men behind him, swords and axes glinting in the lightning. More might be lurking in the darkness. Her guard was outnumbered. She did a quick tally. Ser Jorah, a half-dozen gold cloaks, plus 4 Dothraki. The rest of her men were scattered around the perimeter, potentially unaware of the threat. The situation was dire. Still, she raised her voice with cool authority. "We are not here to conquer the Stormlands by force. The king extends a hand of friendship. If you truly are Robert's bastard, you might seek a diplomatic path rather than bloodshed." He snarled, leaning forward on his saddle. "Diplomatic path? My father's kingdom was stolen by your father's madness and your brother's cunning. I won't kneel. The Stormlands won't kneel. Now step aside, or we'll cut you and your men down." She saw the men behind him shift, some uncertain. The name Targaryen still held terror and awe, especially in the flicker of lightning. Daenerys thought quickly. Perhaps she could reason with them, but the man's eyes glowed with raw hatred, fueled by old stories of Aerys' cruelty, and maybe Robert's drunken ramblings about Targaryens. She realized he wanted a violent confrontation to prove himself. Ser Jorah hissed near her ear. "They'll attack. We can't hold them all. Princess, we need an escape route." She looked around. The campsite was ringed by thick forest, the stream cutting one side. The rain hammered down, turning the ground to mud. If they fled, they risked scattering. If they stayed, they risked a pitched fight in the dark. Neither option was good, but she had no time to weigh it further. Torrhen Storm raised his sword, letting loose a raw battle cry. His men spurred their horses, charging into the camp. Ser Jorah barely had time to shove Daenerys behind him before the first clash of steel erupted. The Dothraki let out fierce war cries of their own, aurochs flashing. A gold cloak was struck down by a rider's axe in a spray of blood. Daenerys staggered back as mud splashed her boots. She glimpsed Torrhen Storm heading directly for her, sword gleaming in the lightning. Ser Jorah jumped forward, parrying the bastard's strike with a resonant clang, sparks flying. Thunder roared overhead. Rain battered them, stinging eyes and turning the ground slick. The air filled with shouts, the thud of bodies, the shrieks of terrified horses. Daenerys fought to keep her balance, cursing the weather that made everything more dangerous. She carried a small dagger at her belt, but the chaos was overwhelming. She saw one Dothraki warrior leap onto a rider, dragging him to the ground with brutal efficiency. A second gold cloak fell, screaming, chest torn open. Through the sheets of rain, Torrhen Storm and Ser Jorah circled each other, swords clashing. Jorah was a skilled knight, but the mud made footwork treacherous, and Torrhen was younger, faster, swinging with reckless fury. Still, Ser Jorah managed to hold him at bay. Daenerys realized that if the rest of the attackers overwhelmed her small group, it wouldn't matter if Jorah beat Torrhen or not. Gritting her teeth, she waded closer to the fray, scanning for any advantage. She spotted a clump of archers rummaging near a supply wagon, her men. "Archers," she screamed over the storm. "Loose arrows on the riders." A few startled men looked up. Recognizing her voice, they hastened to string bows, fumbling in the wet. Arrows hissed through the darkness, downing a couple of Torrhen's riders. One horse shrieked and toppled, throwing its rider into the mud. Daenerys prayed it would be enough to thin the assault. Another wave of riders thundered in from the side, but the Dothraki responded with savage speed, cutting a path through them. She watched, heart pounding, as one of her Dothraki was struck by a hammer blow to the chest, dropping instantly. Rage and grief flared, but she forced herself to remain calm. If they lost their nerve, they all would die. She retreated to the partial cover of a tree, trying to direct the gold cloaks. Her cloak weighed heavily with water, pulling her down. Lightning flashed, illuminating the battlefield for a stark moment. She saw Ser Jorah slip in the mud as Torrhen pressed forward, sword angled for a killing thrust. She screamed, no words, just raw alarm. Before Torrhen could deliver the strike, another figure crashed into him from the side, a gold cloak who tackled the bastard off balance. The two of them tumbled, grappling in the mud. Ser Jorah scrambled to his feet, panting, battered, but alive. Another wave of thunder shook the trees. Daenerys' archers got off another volley, and a few more riders fell. Sensing their momentum ebb, Torrhen's men began to falter. Some turned their horses, spurring away into the darkness, unwilling to die for an uncertain cause in a muddy ambush. Torrhen, locked in a wrestle with the gold cloak, managed to roll free. He lunged toward his horse, but Ser Jorah slashed out with a last burst of energy. The tip of Jorah's blade caught Torrhen's thigh, sending him sprawling again. 3 gold cloaks converged, driving spears close to his face. He froze, breathing hard, eyes wide with hatred. In the span of a few more heartbeats, the chaos died to labored breathing, screams of the wounded, and the endless pounding of rain. Daenerys forced herself to step out from behind the tree, every muscle trembling. Torchlight flickered across the campsite, revealing the broken forms of men, both friend and foe, strewn in the mud. Survivors from Torrhen's group, 5 or 6 at most, were disarmed and huddled together under the watch of Dothraki swords. The rest had fled or lay dead. Daenerys' retinue had also taken casualties. At least 3 gold cloaks lay still, a Dothraki warrior among them. Her throat tightened at the sight. She moved toward Torrhen, who clutched his bleeding thigh. Ser Jorah stood over him, sword raised, chest heaving. Blood trickled from a gash on Jorah's forehead, mixing with rainwater. Torrhen glared, spitting mud. His features indeed bore a faint resemblance to the late King Robert, the broad jaw, the heavy brow. Even in the faint torchlight, Daenerys saw that unmistakable Baratheon stamp. She swallowed the metallic taste in her mouth. "You attacked us without provocation," she said, voice raw. "Why? Is this how you serve the Stormlands?" Torrhen forced a laugh. "Serve? I serve no one, least of all a Targaryen. My father once hammered your house into the ground, should have finished the job. I'll carry on what he began." Daenerys knelt, ignoring the cold water seeping through her boots. She leveled her gaze with Torrhen's. "Your father died a drunken king, leaving the realm in chaos. My brother is trying to mend that. There's no glory in your rebellion, only blood." He sneered, face twisted with pain. "Listen to you, spouting honeyed words. You Targaryens are vipers, all of you. I'd rather die than kneel." Ser Jorah tightened his grip on the sword, but Daenerys held up a hand. She looked at Torrhen carefully. "You're wounded. If you want to die, keep spouting threats, and my men will oblige. Or you can live if you yield." Torrhen's eyes flashed. He glanced around, perhaps realizing how thoroughly defeated he was. Most of his men were gone or captured. The few that remained kept their heads down, shivering in the rain. After a moment, he ground out, "I yield." Daenerys inclined her head to Ser Jorah. The knight lowered his sword, but the threat remained clear. "Bind his wound and chain him," Daenerys ordered. "We'll decide his fate when we reach Storm's End or another secure holdfast." The gold cloaks moved in, pressing Torrhen's arms behind his back. He winced, cursing at them under his breath. Daenerys rose, wiping rain from her face. The battle had been fierce but brief, leaving her shaken. She walked through the carnage, checking on her fallen men. 3 gold cloaks were beyond saving. She knelt beside the body of the Dothraki warrior, a man named Ricardo who had once followed her across the narrow sea. His eyes stared at the sky, rain tapping his cheeks as if weeping for him. She closed his lids gently, a hot tear mixing with the cold water on her face. She whispered a soft Dothraki farewell, a pang of guilt and sorrow gripping her. At last, as the storm began to ease, the survivors regrouped, lit more torches, and gathered the bodies. They would bury their dead or burn them, depending on local custom. Daenerys stood drenched in the wan glow of dawn's approach, feeling the weight of another tragedy. Ser Jorah, limping slightly, approached her. "Princess, we should move at first light. This place is too exposed. We can take Torrhen to Storm's End." She nodded wearily. "Yes, this will send a message to the Stormlands that violence against the crown will not stand. But I don't want a bloodbath. We'll see if we can glean more about his backers." Jorah's voice softened. I'm sorry about Ricardo and the others. Her eyes flicked to the limp body being wrapped in cloth. It seems every step we take demands blood, she whispered. I wonder sometimes if this will ever end. They broke camp at dawn, tired and heartsore. Torrhen Storm was trussed to a horse, his thigh bandaged just enough to keep him alive. Daenerys' force proceeded east, eventually reaching Storm's End again. This time, Ser Courtenay Penrose greeted them with wide-eyed alarm. The sight of a battered, blood-stained party bearing a maimed captive who called himself Robert's bastard caused quite a stir among the garrison. Daenerys requested an immediate audience in the castle's main hall, ignoring her own exhaustion. Word spread like wildfire through Storm's End and beyond. The Targaryen princess had fought off an ambush by a supposed Baratheon bastard. Some hailed her bravery, others gossiped that it was a sign the Stormlands would soon erupt in open conflict. Daenerys herself just wanted to ensure that the local lords understood the crown's intentions. She convened a small gathering of Stormland bannermen in Storm's End's hall. Torrhen Storm brought in under guard, his legs stiff with pain. What is your claim? Daenerys asked him before the assembly. Do you claim the Stormlands are yours by birth? Torrhen spat on the floor. I claim that Robert's blood flows in my veins and that the Stormlands are meant to follow House Baratheon, not Targaryen. That's enough for those with pride, not fear. A low rumble passed through the knights. Some looked away uneasily, others glared at Torrhen, not wishing to be seen as supporting him. Ser Courtenay stepped forward, voice firm. Boy, you raised a sword against the king's envoy. There's no legitimacy in that. If you were truly a bastard of Robert's, you have no claim unless the crown legitimizes you. Torrhen's lip curled. I need no piece of paper from a Targaryen. The realm knows my father's name was enough. He tore the dragon off the throne once. Daenerys forced her voice steady. And your father also fought his friend, Ned Stark, at times and left the realm in debt and fractious. The difference between me and your father is that I prefer to avoid slaughter. She swept her gaze around the hall. People of the Stormlands, I ask you, has my brother the king visited ruin upon you? Or has he sought to rebuild, to mend, to bring fairness? You might still resent the Targaryen name, but if you cling to old hatreds, you'll only breed new wars. A hush fell. Some knights bowed their heads. Others avoided her eyes. Torrhen snorted, clearly unimpressed. But he was alone, bound, and powerless. Daenerys turned to Ser Courtenay. As Castellan of Storm's End, you shall hold him until the king decides his fate. Keep him alive, but confined. Torrhen let out a short laugh. Cower behind your walls, Targaryen princess. My kin out there won't rest until the Stormlands are ours again. Daenerys met his glare. Then they can come to court or they can come to the battlefield. The choice is theirs. In the days that followed, Daenerys remained at Storm's End, meeting with local knights and captains, trying to coax a measure of calm. Torrhen Storm's defeat had rattled those who'd pinned hopes on a Baratheon resurgence. Still, rumors persisted of smaller pockets of dissidence in the region. Daenerys recognized that her presence alone wouldn't solve the underlying tensions, but at least she had prevented an immediate revolt. Meanwhile, ravens flew back and forth to King's Landing. Viserys' replies showed alarm at the ambush and relief that his sister lived. He urged her to do whatever necessary to stabilize the Stormlands, short of open war. Another letter arrived from Queen Margaery expressing sympathy for Daenerys' losses and offering to send more supplies or funds. Daenerys appreciated the Queen's generosity but doubted the Storm Lords would appreciate caravans of Tyrell-labeled goods rolling into their domains. It might only stoke their resentment of the growing Tyrell influence. So she politely declined, vowing to handle the matter with local resources. As the weather improved marginally, Daenerys decided it was time to return to King's Landing and report to Viserys in person. She left a small group of loyal men at Storm's End to monitor Torrhen Storm's captivity, ensuring he received basic care but remained securely locked away. Ser Courtenay agreed, albeit nervously, that it was the best solution for now. So, one crisp morning, Daenerys' party set forth, bearing scars of recent battle and the memory of lives lost. The journey back was quieter, though the roads were soggy with late autumn rains. The leaves had almost all fallen from the trees, leaving bare branches that rattled in the wind. Daenerys found she missed the hustle and color of King's Landing. Out here, every farmland and village looked weary and battered by the cycle of conflict. Occasionally they would come upon small gatherings of peasants, and Daenerys would distribute coins or food as she could. She felt the eyes upon her, cautious, curious, occasionally hopeful. Perhaps her presence brought a glimmer of reassurance. Or perhaps they simply wondered how long until the next wave of violence overcame them. More than once, Daenerys caught herself wishing for a simpler life, one where politics and vendettas did not shape every waking moment. On the final stretch toward the capital, Ser Jorah rode beside her, both of them wrapped in thick cloaks. He cleared his throat. "You've done your best, princess. The Stormlands may not love us, but at least they aren't in open rebellion." She nodded. "But Torrhen Storm's existence worries me. If even one other bastard or claimant steps forth, we could see new waves of conflict. And that might push my brother into a more aggressive stance. I know he doesn't want war, but the realm can only endure so many threats before it demands a show of force." Jorah's expression was grim. "Perhaps the best way is to keep forging alliances. So far, King Viserys has proven he can unite lords. Look at the Ironborn campaign, the pact with the North. Maybe he can do the same with the Stormlands if they see the folly of rebellion." Daenerys attempted a wry smile. "I hope you're right. Gods know we've seen enough bloodshed." King's Landing hove into view just as dusk settled, the city's lights glittering like fireflies against the darkening sky. Daenerys felt a swirl of relief and apprehension. She wondered how Viserys and Margaery would greet her, whether the capital had changed in her absence. As she led her procession through the gate, the city seemed subdued, with a chill wind scuttling leaves across the cobblestones. The gold cloaks parted to let them pass. By the time they reached the Red Keep, torches burned along the walls and an undercurrent of curiosity threaded through the courtyard. Stable hands rushed to take horses, while a few servants gathered to see the returning princess. Viserys and Margaery appeared on the steps leading into the keep. Viserys wore a heavy black cloak trimmed with fur, and Margaery's gown showed embroidered roses on the sleeves, though a thicker shawl protected her from the cold. Daenerys dismounted wearily, meeting their gazes. Viserys' eyes shone with relief and anxious questions. She bowed her head in greeting. "Brother, your grace." Viserys took 2 steps forward, ignoring the formalities, and embraced her briefly. She felt the tension in his frame as he pulled back. "I heard about the ambush," he said. "I'm glad you're safe." Margaery's concern shone in her brown eyes. "We received only a brief raven about the encounter with Torrhen Storm. Are you well?" Daenerys managed a tired nod. "We lost some good men. But Torrhen Storm is captured. I left him at Storm's End. As for the Storm Lords, many still have grievances, but at least they're not in open revolt." Viserys exhaled, leading her inside to the relative warmth of the keep. Servants rushed to bring hot wine and towels to wipe away travel grime. Daenerys could only imagine how bedraggled she looked, but she cared little. She wanted rest and to deliver the full account of the Stormlands' unrest. Once settled in Viserys' solar, she recounted everything in detail: the tensions she'd witnessed, Torrhen Storm's claims, the ambush under the downpour, the final arrangement at Storm's End. Viserys listened intently, hands clenched. Margaery added occasional questions. Ser Barristan, also present, rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. Ser Jorah offered clarifications. By the end, the king's face was grim, eyes stormy with conflicting emotions. "So the Stormlands remain uncertain," he summarized. "Torrhen Storm is a living symbol of that old resentment. If they rally to him, gods, we can't let that seed grow." Daenerys spoke carefully. "We can't just execute him outright. That would inflame the Storm Lords who see him as a Baratheon scion. But letting him go would be folly." Viserys frowned. "I might have him brought here under heavy guard. Show him off as a prisoner, humiliating the notion that he's a rightful heir. But that too could backfire, turn him into a martyr. If we keep him locked away quietly, we risk rumors of ill treatment or worse. All the while, other troublemakers might use him as a banner, even from afar." Margaery laid a gentle hand on Viserys' arm. "We must tread lightly. Perhaps we can arrange a meeting with the major Storm landlords, reassure them that we won't ignore their needs. Torrhen could be used as a bargaining chip. If they uphold peace, they can have him return to the Stormlands in some capacity, under a watchful eye." Viserys sighed, leaning back in his chair. "That might be an option. For now, let's keep him confined at Storm's End. I'll write to Ser Courtenay with specific instructions. No harm is to come to Torrhen unless he attempts escape. Meanwhile, we'll intensify our diplomatic efforts." Daenerys nodded, though a heavy knot of doubt weighed in her gut. She'd tasted the Stormlanders' anger firsthand, and she suspected that even if Torrhen Storm was out of the picture, the underlying resentment would remain. Bloodlines ran deep in Westeros, and the echoes of Robert Baratheon's rebellion would not simply fade. Still, she had done what she could, and for the moment, that had to suffice. Exhausted from her journey, Daenerys excused herself, longing for a bath and a night of uninterrupted sleep. Margaery embraced her lightly, telling her to rest well, and Viserys squeezed her hand in thanks. The corridors felt both familiar and strangely different as she made her way to her chambers. Her mind drifted to the day she and Viserys had first arrived in King's Landing after years of exile, so uncertain and desperate. Now, she was a princess who had commanded armies, parleyed with princes, defied assassins. Yet she still felt the realm's weight on her shoulders. She worried that one misstep from her brother or herself would trigger the downfall they had so long feared. The next weeks passed with a tense quiet in King's Landing. Winter's approach made the days shorter, the nights colder. Fog rolled in from Blackwater Bay, cloaking the city at dawn. Viserys turned his attention to the usual array of council matters, collecting taxes, provisioning the capital, and continuing to pay down debts incurred by the war against the Ironborn. Margaery oversaw charitable endeavors in Flea Bottom, distributing warm cloaks and bread to the poorest. That earned her more admiration from the small folk, and the rumor mill suggested that the queen might be with child, though no official announcement came. Daenerys, for her part, resumed her quieter role in the Red Keep. Yet her restlessness grew with each passing day. She felt as though she were waiting for a distant thunder to break. A small tension point arose when Tyrell bannermen began arriving in King's Landing, seeking favor or position. Margaery's father, Mace Tyrell, had pestered the court with suggestions of placing more Tyrell men in key offices, but Viserys resisted. He did not want the realm to believe Highgarden was overshadowing the crown. Daenerys observed how skillfully Margaery navigated these issues, offering gentle reassurances to her father while aligning with Viserys' cautious approach. The queen proved adept at turning potential conflicts into a flurry of polite compromise. Nonetheless, some Stormlanders who visited on small errands could not hide their scowls at seeing so many Tyrell banners in the city. The seeds of discontent lingered. Late one evening, Daenerys lingered in the library, flipping through musty tomes on Targaryen history. The flickering candles cast dancing shadows on the shelves. She came upon a set of old genealogical scrolls describing the union of Storm's End and the Targaryens during the time of Aegon V, but the details were patchy. Her mind drifted to Torrenstorm. What if he truly was Robert's bastard? The genealogies might matter to him or to any who wanted to legitimize him. Shaking off the thought, she replaced the scroll and wandered to a window. Far below, the city slept, a peppering of lanterns along the streets. The moon shone brightly, illuminating the parapets and the sprawl of black roofs. Footsteps approached. She turned to see Margaery wearing a pale gown with a heavy shawl draped over her arms. The queen offered a warm smile. "I thought I might find you here. The library is quieter than the rest of the keep. May I join you?" Daenerys inclined her head, stepping aside. They stood by the window together, the hush of night wrapping them in a cocoon. Margaery exhaled softly. "I wanted to thank you for your efforts in the Stormlands. I know it was difficult." Daenerys' gaze flicked to the moonlit city. "I did what was needed. It wasn't enough, though. We still have tension. I fear it will not vanish as easily as we hope." Margaery nodded. "Viserys worries, too. He's weighed down by the demands of the realm. Sometimes I see him pacing late at night, unable to sleep." Daenerys offered a faint smile. "I used to think the Iron Throne was a prize we had to reclaim at any cost. Now I wonder if it's more a burden that no one person can truly bear alone." Margaery's eyes shone with empathy. "That's why alliances matter, I suppose. And family." She paused. "You and Viserys are the last of your line, after all. I know you love each other. He speaks of you with respect, even if he doesn't always show it openly." Daenerys felt a pang. Memories of their youth rose unbidden, him snapping at her in exile, calling her a burden. Then recent memories, fighting side by side. She closed her eyes. "We've both changed. He tries to be a better king than our father. Sometimes I see glimpses of the old bitterness in him, but then he chooses a kinder path." Margaery's hand brushed Daenerys' arm. "We all have our ghosts, but you've helped him learn, and I believe you still can." Before Daenerys could reply, a knock sounded on the door. A servant peered inside, apologizing for the intrusion. "Forgive me, your graces. A raven from Storm's End has arrived. The king requests your presence in the council chamber at once." Exchanging a worried glance, Margaery and Daenerys hurried out. They found Viserys and his closest advisors gathered around the table, grim-faced. The king held an open scroll in his hand. When they entered, he set it down with a tired exhalation. "News from Storm's End," he said, voice taut. "Torrenstorm escaped." Daenerys felt her stomach clench. "How?" Ser Barristan spoke up. "Apparently, a group of masked men infiltrated Storm's End's dungeons. They killed 2 guards, freed Torrhen, and fled by nightfall. Ser Courtenay's men pursued, but lost them in the forest. It seems they had help from inside the fortress." Viserys' features twisted with frustration. "The Stormlands indeed. It's a hornet's nest. Now Torrhen is free to rally those who resent us, maybe more than before. I should have dragged him here in chains. Daenerys swallowed hard, recalling the man's fury. He'll use this to stoke rebellion, claim he's unstoppable. If he raises enough men, we could face open war. Do we have any leads on where he's gone? The king shook his head. None. He's vanished, perhaps into the deep woods or across some hidden route. But the Stormlands are large and lords might secretly shelter him. If we send an army, we could risk a full-scale conflict. If we do nothing, we risk being caught off guard. Marjorie spoke softly. We must handle this carefully. A heavy-handed invasion of the Stormlands might unite them against us. But ignoring it is foolish. We need a plan. Viserys pressed his palms to the table, tension visible in the set of his shoulders. We have few good choices, he admitted. I will send ravens to the major lords, demanding they reaffirm loyalty and assist in capturing Torrhen. Those who refuse will be suspect. Simultaneously, we can send a royal force to watch the roads, not to invade, but to keep order. And if we locate Torrhen's camp, we root it out. Daenerys clasped her hands. I'll go again, if you wished. No, Viserys cut in, though not harshly. Not this time. You've done enough. It's too dangerous, especially now that Torrhen will be gunning for revenge. I'll send Ser Barristan or another trusted commander. She inclined her head. As you command, brother. He sighed, glancing at Marjorie. The realm never rests, does it? We must be vigilant. Marjorie reached out, gently touching his arm. We will be. And we'll do it together. So it began, a new cycle of tension. Ravens flew across the Stormlands, carrying the king's edicts, demanding that the local lords disclaim Torrhen's storm and aid in his capture. Some quickly responded with assurances of loyalty, others offered lukewarm replies, citing insufficient men or resources. Ser Barristan mustered a small force of Crownlanders and marched to key crossroads, hoping to secure them against bandits or rebels. Daenerys tried to stay informed, but she often felt sidelined by Viserys' decision to keep her out of the front lines. She knew his choice came from concern for her safety, yet she chafed at being idle. Meanwhile, as winter drew nearer, talk of closed mountain passes and storms at sea circulated in the city. The Vale was said to be tightening its borders, preparing for heavy snow. The North, somewhat ironically, enjoyed a respite from harsh conditions for the moment, though that might change at any time. Robb Stark remained distant but cooperative, sending small tokens of grain to King's Landing as per their treaty. House Lannister, still led by Jaime from Casterly Rock, seemed content to focus on strengthening the Westerlands, though word reached the capital that Euron Greyjoy had been sighted once more near the coast, up to unknown mischief. The realm felt like a tapestry with threads fraying at every edge. Daenerys spent more hours wandering the city, checking on the poor, hearing their concerns. She found that many small folk struggled with rising bread prices, aggravated by the crown's debt and the disruption of trade routes. She distributed what aid she could, often accompanied by Marjorie's handmaids and a handful of Dothraki or gold cloaks. The people recognized her silver hair and would sometimes call out blessings. But she sensed the tension, an undercurrent of fear about tomorrow or next week or next month. The realm had endured so many wars, so many kings, so many broken promises. They dared not trust too deeply. One late afternoon, as the sky glowed pale gray and the streets bustled with folk hurrying before curfew, Daenerys passed by a dilapidated inn near Flea Bottom. She heard raised voices from within, angry shouting, then a crash of breaking pottery. Concerned, she gestured for her guards to follow and stepped inside. The common room reeked of stale ale and unwashed bodies, dimly lit by a few guttering candles. Two men were scuffling near the fireplace, bellowing curses. Another man sat at a table, staring into his cup. A wench cowered behind the counter. The moment Daenerys entered, accompanied by armed escorts, the room fell into a charged hush. She lifted a hand. "What goes on here?" she asked calmly. One man, a wiry fellow with a bruise forming on his cheek, pointed at the other. "He's a Stormlander fool, spouting off about the rightful king being Torrhen Storm. I told him that's treason talk, but he wouldn't shut up." The accused man, panting and wide-eyed, saw Daenerys and spat. "Torrhen Storm is no traitor, he's the last real blood of Robert. He'll come to claim what's his, just you watch. Targaryens are A gold cloak slammed the man's shoulder, cutting him off. Daenerys stepped forward, eyes flashing. "You would speak treason so openly?" His gaze flickered. Realizing who she was, he stumbled back. "Princess." He looked around in desperation, perhaps realizing the seriousness of his predicament. Then, in a surge of foolish bravado, he lifted his chin. "What's treason about telling the truth? Robert hammered your father's line once. Torrhen'll do it again." A muscle clenched in Daenerys' jaw. She signaled to her men. Detain him. Let him cool off in a cell until we see if he's part of any conspiracy. The gold cloaks seized him. He cursed and struggled, but they dragged him outside. The innkeeper stammered apologies, bowing over and over. Daenerys forced a reassuring smile. No harm will come to your establishment. Keep your patrons from brawling, and if you hear more such talk, report it to the city watch. The innkeeper nodded vigorously, still trembling. Daenerys and her retinue left, the commotion drawing stares from passers-by. She hated to arrest a drunken fool for spouting nonsense, but the realm was teetering on the edge. If Torrent Storm's name was becoming a rallying cry in the gutters of King's Landing, then perhaps the threat was more pervasive than she'd feared. That evening, she reported the incident to Viserys in his solar. He paced, frustration etched on his features. Margaery sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, absorbing every detail. When Daenerys finished, Viserys let out a weary sigh. It seems we have a plague of rumors. The Stormlands, the city's taverns. This is precisely how rebellions ignite. Margaery leaned forward. We could try to snuff out the rumors by offering a small bounty for information on Torrent Storm's whereabouts. Let the common folk see that we are serious about capturing him. Daenerys nodded. But be careful not to feed their curiosity further. If we place too high a bounty, we elevate him into a legendary figure. Viserys rubbed his temples. Then we set a modest bounty and keep an eye on the gates and docks. The city watch must be vigilant. Meanwhile, if Ser Barristan's men spot any sign of him in the Stormlands, they'll strike. The days turned into weeks. The cold sharpened, the nights lengthened. King's Landing braced for the bite of winter, though it was mild here compared to the north. Rumors about Torrent Storm, Euron Greyjoy, and other potential troublemakers swirled. Yet no open war erupted. The realm seemed suspended in an uneasy calm. Daenerys found herself drawn more frequently into smaller tasks, mediating disputes among lesser lords, settling trade arguments. She knew Viserys had chosen to rely on her, trusting her fairness. But she also sensed a restlessness in him, a fear that the crown's hold was slipping. Sometimes she would catch him in the throne room at odd hours, perched on the Iron Throne with a brooding expression as though haunted by the swords forged into its metal. When she approached, he would force a smile, changing the subject. A deeper worry began to gnaw at Daenerys as the realm's tensions mounted. How far would Viserys go to preserve order? In the past, he had chosen compromise. But how many times could he yield before the realm demanded a show of force? The memory of Torrent Storm's ambush and the defiance in that man's eyes replayed in her thoughts. If there was a larger outbreak of rebellion, would Viserys unleash a harsh crackdown, risking the tyranny he had sworn to avoid? How would she respond if he did? She loved her brother, but she also carried the convictions formed by her own hardships. She could not stand idly by if he repeated their father's mistakes. Unbeknownst to most in the court, Daenerys' anxieties found an odd confidant in Ser Jorah. Late at night, in the training yard or strolling the castle's walls, she would speak quietly of her fears. Jorah listened with sober respect, though he offered reassurances that Viserys was not Ares. Over time, Daenerys realized that Jorah's devotion had shifted. No longer was he solely fixated on her, nor was he simply a knight redeemed by Viserys' rule. Instead, he had grown protective of both Targaryen siblings and the fragile realm they led. She appreciated his loyalty and counsel, though she still guarded her deeper thoughts. If push came to shove, where would Jorah stand? Winter's first full moon rose behind scudding clouds, painting the Red Keep with cold light. On that night, a raven arrived from Dorne, bearing Prince Doran's seal. Daenerys read it with furrowed brow, then brought it to Viserys and Margaery. The letter explained that ships from the Summer Sea carried rumors of a potential new threat, a Sellsword company, the Stormcrows, rumored to have allied with certain factions in the Stepstones, possibly under the pay of someone with an interest in destabilizing Westeros. The letter was maddeningly vague but implied that the threat might come by sea. Prince Doran suggested vigilance, especially in the Stormlands and the southern coasts. The idea of another external threat on top of internal unrest weighed heavily on Daenerys' mind. Viserys, upon reading it, closed his eyes and took a moment to gather himself. Must every corner of the world test us at once? He muttered. But then he set to drafting instructions to the royal fleet, telling them to watch the waters near the Stepstones and keep an ear out for Sellsword vessels. The realm had only recently recovered from the Ironborn campaign, and the navy was still stretched. This new puzzle threatened to open yet another front of worry. Amid these swirling uncertainties, Margaery quietly pulled Daenerys aside one morning just after breakfast. They stood by a window in a lesser-used gallery, sunlight filtering through stained glass. Margaery's eyes shone with excitement. I haven't told Viserys yet. I planned to tonight, but I had the Grand Maester confirm it this morning. She took Daenerys' hand. I'm with child. Surprise and a flicker of joy shot through Daenerys. Truly? Marjorie nodded, her cheeks flushing with happiness. He says he's quite sure. I've missed 2 cycles and shown other signs. I want to share the news with you before the court descends on me with well wishes. This changes everything, doesn't it? Daenerys squeezed the queen's hand gently, finding a genuine smile. It's wonderful news. It means the realm will have an heir, a symbol of continuity. It might ease some fears, or at least give them hope. Marjorie's smile widened. I hope so. I know Viserys has carried the burden of continuing his line. This might lighten his heart if only a little. That evening, a small gathering was held in the royal apartments. Viserys was told the news in a private moment first, and Daenerys watched from across the room as his guarded expression melted into one of stunned joy. He embraced Marjorie, murmuring words Daenerys could not make out. Then he kissed her hands, tears shining in his eyes. When they turned to Daenerys, the king's face glowed with an emotion she had rarely seen, something akin to pure relief, as though a decade of anxiety had lifted from his back. Daenerys and Marjorie embraced, sharing in the moment of happiness. Soon after, word spread through the court. Polite applause and congratulations followed. Lords and ladies congratulated the king, bowing deeper than usual. Daenerys noted how swiftly the news traveled through the city. By dawn the next day, small folk were chattering about a royal babe, pinning hopes on a new generation that might bring better fortunes. For a brief time, the gloom of approaching winter seemed to lift. Even references to torrent storm and seditious talk quieted somewhat. The presence of a new Targaryen heir on the horizon could unify hearts, at least for a while. The mood in the Red Keep improved. Viserys set about ensuring Marjorie's comfort. Grand Maester Benedor advised rest and good nutrition for the queen. The king, nearly giddy, walked with Marjorie in the gardens, discussing names and possible tutors. Daenerys felt a lighter atmosphere in their usual gatherings, though she reminded herself that troubles outside the keep had not vanished. Still, the king's new optimism might shape how he dealt with those threats, perhaps with more caution, less desperation. Days slipped into weeks. Marjorie's condition progressed. She occasionally felt bouts of morning sickness, but otherwise glowed with maternal health. The small council convened regularly, tackling the realm's issues with renewed purpose. Talk of the future overshadowed worries about Torrent Storm or Sellsword companies, at least until a fresh crisis arrived on the council's doorstep. On a snowy morning, an unusual sight for King's Landing, a messenger from the Stormlands burst into the Red Keep, half-frozen and breathless. He insisted on speaking to the king immediately. Daenerys and Marjorie were not present initially, but the uproar in the halls soon drew them. They entered the council chamber to find Viserys, his face set in stone, listening as the messenger stammered out a harrowing account. Torrent Storm had raised a small army near Rain House, gathering disgruntled knights and mercenaries. They had begun raiding nearby lands, even challenging local garrisons. The messenger pleaded for royal intervention. Viserys' hands balled into fists on the table. Did he declare open rebellion? He demanded. The messenger bobbed his head. Yes, your grace. He calls himself the rightful Storm King now, claims the Targaryens are foreign tyrants. Some knights have flocked to his banner, and a portion of the small folk in that region, too. A hush fell. Then Grand Maester Benedor cleared his throat. This is no small bandit raid. He's openly challenging the crown's authority. Ser Barristan's jaw tightened. We should march a royal army at once. End this quickly before it spreads. Viserys' gaze flicked to Marjorie, then Daenerys. His voice shook with the weight of decision. If we muster an army, we risk turning the Stormlands into a war zone again. But if we do nothing, Torrhen grows stronger. Marjorie stepped forward calmly. My love, we cannot allow open rebellion to stand. The realm needs decisive action, or others may follow Torrhen's example. Daenerys nodded, though her heart sank at the prospect of more bloodshed. We must show strength, but also offer a chance for those who joined him under false promises to lay down their arms. Perhaps we can send a final warning before marching. Viserys' eyes flickered with conflict. He could become the tyrant or risk losing the realm's respect. His father's ghost seemed to loom at the edge of his thoughts. At last, he inhaled sharply. Yes, we'll send an ultimatum. Surrender or face the king's justice. Meanwhile, prepare the troops. If Torrhen does not yield, we march. That began the final slide into confrontation. Ravens flew to Rain House, carrying Viserys' demand. No reply came. The king, flanked by Ser Barristan, raised a host of Crownlanders, some Lannister auxiliaries, and volunteers from lesser houses. The Tyrells offered men, but the king hesitated to bring Tyrell soldiers into the Stormlands, fearing it would only feed the narrative that Targaryens relied on Tyrell power. After debate, he accepted a smaller Tyrell contingent, enough to bolster numbers without overshadowing the crown's own forces. Daenerys prepared to ride with the host, but Viserys forbade it. "I will not risk you, sister," he said firmly. "This is war. Torrent Storm singled you out before. Remain in King's Landing with Marjorie. Keep ward. Are here." She felt a surge of frustration, but saw the worry in his eyes. Reluctantly, she agreed. The king's army mustered outside the city gates on a gray morning, plumes of breath steaming in the chill. The men carried Targaryen banners, black fabric stitched with red dragons, a symbol meant to project unity and power. Ser Barristan rode at the king's side, solemn and steady. Marjorie stood on the battlements with Daenerys, both wrapped in warm cloaks. They watched as Viserys, clad in polished armor and a cloak of black fur, raised his sword to salute them before leading the host southward. Trumpets echoed off the walls as the long column of troops disappeared into the winter haze. Days passed, turning into a fortnight. Tense silence fell over King's Landing, broken only by scattered news from scouts. Torrent Storm had indeed drawn more men to his cause. Some disillusioned storm lords, a smattering of mercenaries, and plenty of peasants hungry for a champion. They took refuge in the rough terrain near Rain House, turning it into a defensive position. Viserys' host advanced carefully. Small skirmishes erupted, casualties mounted on both sides. Daenerys pored over each raven, her heart twisting at the thought of more needless death. Marjorie tried to remain composed, but Daenerys saw the worry etched in her features, especially as the pregnancy progressed. At last, a breathless courier arrived at dawn, demanding to see the queen and the princess. He carried a blood-stained scroll bearing the royal seal. Daenerys' hands trembled as she broke the seal. The message contained a curt summary. Viserys had led a final assault, cornering Torrent Storm's forces by the coastline. A fierce battle ensued. Torrent himself was gravely wounded and captured. The king's army was victorious, though many men died. Viserys was safe, but Ser Barristan was injured. The king would return to King's Landing soon. Relief warred with sorrow in Daenerys' heart. They had won, but at what cost? She showed the scroll to Marjorie, who closed her eyes in silent prayer. For 2 more days, the city waited, bracing for the king's triumphant return. Then, in a cold drizzle, Viserys and his battered army rode through the gates. Citizens gathered to watch, uncertain whether to cheer. The men looked exhausted, splattered with mud and dried blood. Their banners hung limp in the rain. At the forefront rode Viserys, expression grim, a bandage on his left arm. Torrent Storm followed in chains, slumped across a horse, face pallid with barely contained fury and pain. Whispers rippled through the crowd at the sight of the would-be Storm King so utterly defeated. Daenerys hurried to the courtyard, Marjorie at her side. As Viserys dismounted, Daenerys rushed forward, scanning him for injuries. He wore a leather cuirass scratched and dented, a bruise darkening his cheek. His eyes flicked to her, relief and fatigue mingling. "It's done," he said hoarsely. "He can't trouble us again." Marjorie approached, tears in her eyes as she laid a hand on his chest. "You're wound, Just a scratch," he muttered, though the tightness in his voice said otherwise. He turned to watch as soldiers dragged Torrent Storm down from the horse. Torrent nearly collapsed, but he braced himself, glaring at Viserys. The courtyard fell silent. Rain spattered on stone. In a raw voice, Torrent spat, "So you've won. Go on, kill me. Show the realm how merciful you Targaryens are." Viserys clenched a trembling fist, glancing at Daenerys. She saw indecision and anger in his eyes. "I offered you a chance to surrender," he growled. "You spat on it. You cost the lives of good men." Torrent barked a bitter laugh. "Your father burned men alive. Your line is cursed. I'd rather die fighting than kneel to a Targaryen." A hush fell, the tension thick. Daenerys' heart pounded. She remembered the vow she had once made that she would not allow tyranny to consume her family. She stepped forward, voice carrying across the courtyard. "Brother, do not let this moment define your reign in blood. Torrent Storm has committed treason, yes, but do we gain anything by slaughtering him now? Is there another path?" Viserys' eyes flickered with conflict. Rain trickled down his face. The men around them watched, uncertain. Marjorie's gaze was filled with concern, her hands clenched at her sides. Slowly, Viserys let out a shaky breath. He stands condemned by every law of the realm. Yet perhaps there is no need to make him a martyr. He looked at the guards. "Take him to the dungeons securely. I will decide his fate after consulting the council." Torrent's face twisted in scorn. "Coward. A real king would, eh?" A guard rammed an elbow into his side, cutting off his words. They dragged him away, leaving the courtyard in an uneasy quiet. Daenerys realized she had been holding her breath. She exhaled, hoping that a more measured approach might prevent a spiral of revenge. Viserys turned to her, lips pressed in a grim line. "I need rest. We'll speak tomorrow." He retreated into the keep, soldiers parting to let him pass. Marjorie followed, glancing back at Daenerys with a worried expression. Daenerys hesitated in the rain, feeling the eyes of onlookers on her. Some might blame her for urging mercy, some might appreciate it. She wondered if she had delayed the inevitable, that Torrent might still die or perhaps rot in a cell. Another wave of exhaustion crashed over her. She sensed that the realm stood at a precipice. One misstep might tumble them all into chaos. Over the next few days, King Viserys recovered from his wound, presiding over a subdued court. The soldiers who survived the battle received honors, though the air was too somber for grand celebration. Rumors circulated about Torrent Storm's upcoming trial or possible execution or a forced exile. Daenerys offered her counsel in private. Marjorie, concerned for the king's health and the unborn child, gently tried to steer him toward leniency, believing the realm needed closure, not more blood. Yet others on the council, lords who had lost men in the campaign, demanded Torrent's head. They claimed only a firm example would dissuade future rebels. Finally, one cold morning, the court gathered in the throne room. Viserys seated himself on the Iron Throne, flanked by the king's guard. Marjorie stood to one side, Daenerys to the other, each silent with tension. Guards hauled Torrent Storm before the throne. His face was thinner, the wound in his side still healing. Chains rattled on his wrists. He stared at Viserys with the same unwavering hate. The king's voice rang out in the vaulted hall. "Torrent Storm, you have been found guilty of treason, murder, and rebellion against the crown. Your armies have been shattered, your cause defeated. Have you any final words?" Torrent's lip curled. "Only that Robert Baratheon's blood still flows in these veins. Kill me if you dare. You Targaryens will fall again as you did before." A ripple of murmurs passed through the onlookers. Viserys sat stiffly, jaw tight. Daenerys could almost see him wrestling with the decision. The old Targaryen kings might have burned the traitor alive. Robert Baratheon might have demanded the traitor's head. What would Viserys do? Slowly, he lifted his chin. "You are condemned to die," he pronounced, voice low. "And yet I find no honor in staining the realm further with your blood. Instead, you shall be sent across the narrow sea, given to the free cities with the understanding that if you ever set foot in Westeros again, you forfeit your life. You will have no gold, no rank, only your wretched pride. That is the mercy I grant you, for I will not have you become a martyr in my realm." A collective gasp rippled through the hall. Torrent's eyes widened with disbelief. Daenerys felt an immense wave of relief, though laced with caution. Banishing him might allow him to plot from abroad, but it also robbed him of immediate power. The lords who demanded blood might complain, but they could not deny that the king had chosen a course that denied the rebel a glorious death. Torrent, recovering from shock, let out a bitter laugh. "Coward's mercy," he spat. "But very well. Keep your damn throne. It will crumble under you soon enough." He glared at Daenerys. "And you, Targaryen princess, I owe you a reckoning for that night in the rain. One day, perhaps." Before Ser Barristan could strike him for the insolence, Viserys wrapped the iron arm of the throne. "Take him away," he snapped, voice echoing. "Arrange for a ship to Bravos. Chain him in the hold until it leaves." Guards dragged Torrent from the throne room. The audience erupted in hushed chatter, some outraged at the king's leniency, others confused, and a rare few relieved. Daenerys let out a quiet breath, feeling Marjorie's tentative hand on her arm. She looked at her brother on the throne, his face ashen, shoulders rigid, but a flicker of resolve in his eyes. This was not the decision of Aerys, nor of Robert. It was Viserys' own brand of justice, a precarious balance of mercy and power. After that day, the realm exhaled a collective sigh. Torrhen's Storm was gone, shipped east under guard, sworn never to return. Some rebellious Storm Lords slunk back into uneasy submission, chastened by the Crown's decisive victory. Others grumbled that the king was too soft, but for the moment open war was averted. Viserys turned once more to the tasks of governance. Margaery's pregnancy advanced, and Daenerys noticed how the king clung to the hope of an heir as if it were a shield against all doubts. Winter's gloom hovered, but the snows did not come heavily to King's Landing. Instead, freezing rain and chill winds battered the city. Despite the inclement weather, trade continued, with merchants from the Reach and the Westerlands braving the roads. Slowly, some normalcy returned. Daenerys spent her days overseeing smaller matters, negotiating with guilds, and planning modest improvements to the city's drainage to prevent flooding. At night, she read ancient histories in the library or took long walks on the battlements, lost in thought. One evening, as she walked along the ramparts, watching the flicker of torchlight on the city's lower walls, Ser Jorah joined her. The winter sky glowed faintly with stars, the wind biting. "You've been quieter these past weeks, princess," he observed gently. Daenerys drew her cloak tighter. "I feel unsettled. Torrhen's Storm's rebellion is over, but the realm's divisions remain. My brother grows more assured in his power. He's proven he can win battles and banish traitors. Yet I sense a hardness creeping into him, piece by piece. He tries to resist it, but every new threat pushes him closer to tyranny." Jorah frowned. "You think he'll become the next Ares?" She shook her head. "Not exactly. He's not cruel by nature. But power warps all who touch it. If the realm keeps testing him, if he feels cornered, I fear what choices he might make. And I don't know what I'll do if that happens." Jorah's gaze was heavy with sympathy. "You've come this far together. Perhaps he'll remember who he wants to be, not who the crown demands." They stood in silence for a long moment, breath curling in the icy air. Daenerys looked out at the city. 1,000 stories, 1,000 hopes and fears, all hinged on the rule of House Targaryen. She recalled the night she told Viserys she could not support tyranny. Would that moment come again, where the realm forced them into opposite corners? Days drifted into weeks, then months. The final heavy snows of winter skirted the capital, leaving it damp and cold but largely passable. The queen's belly swelled. Grand Maester Benedor predicted a spring birth if all went well. Viserys' mood oscillated between bursts of energy, issuing new edicts, scolding councils for inefficiency, and bouts of introspection where he seemed haunted by every rumor of potential discord. Even the smallest piece of gossip sometimes set him on edge. Another letter arrived from Prince Doran in Dorne, cautioning that rumors of a dangerous warlord in Essos were growing louder. The Stormcrows, combined with other Cells word companies, might be massing near lists, possibly funded by a wealthy patron. Viserys cursed the news. He had no desire for another war overseas, yet he couldn't dismiss the possibility that these groups could be hired to destabilize Westeros again. The king's coffers were still recovering, though better than before thanks to careful management. He penned replies to Dorne, the Vale, and even the North, subtly suggesting the realm remain alert to external threats. Daenerys wondered if the realm would ever know a year without rumors of war. Margaery, fully aware that stress could harm her child, tried to maintain a serene environment in the Red Keep. She oversaw quiet feasts, softened tensions between minor lords, and used her influence to encourage charitable works. Daenerys joined her sometimes, distributing bread in Flea Bottom or giving alms to the Faith's new hospital. The small folk took heart in these acts, though beneath their gratitude, Daenerys sensed a wariness. They had endured tyranny before, they knew how quickly fortunes could reverse. As the final snows melted and the first hints of spring arrived, Margaery went into labor. It happened in the middle of the night. Alarms spread through the Red Keep, midwives rushing to her chambers. Viserys, frantic, was barred from entering by the healers who insisted they needed space. He prowled outside the door like a caged animal, Ser Barristan standing by with quiet sympathy. Daenerys arrived soon after, wanting to help, but the midwives ushered her away as well. Hours passed, each one an agony of uncertainty. Finally, near dawn, the door creaked open. A midwife emerged, smiling wearily. "A boy," she announced. "The queen is safe. The babe is healthy." Viserys nearly collapsed with relief. He burst into the room, Daenerys behind him. Margaery lay propped on pillows, hair damp with sweat, face pale but smiling as she cradled a small, wriggling form. The babe let out a soft cry, eyes tightly shut, a faint fuzz of silver-blonde hair on his head like a Targaryen. Margaery beckoned Viserys closer. His eyes brimmed with tears as he touched his son's tiny hand. Daenerys approached, her heart surging with an unexpected wave of love. "He's beautiful," she whispered. "What will you name him?" Viserys looked at Margaery and she nodded. He turned to Daenerys. We thought perhaps Aegon after our forefather, he said softly. Does that please you? She blinked back tears. A fine name, she agreed, recalling how Rhaegar Targaryen had a son named Aegon once. This child, so small and innocent, carried the weight of an ancient legacy. It was a burden and a promise all at once. Word spread quickly through the city and the realm. The king and queen had a son, Prince Aegon Targaryen. Celebrations rippled through King's Landing, for a royal birth brought fresh hope. Feasts were planned, gifts arrived from every corner of Westeros, golden roses from Highgarden, silver-gilt swords from the Westerlands, rare spices from Dorne, carved weirwood trinkets from the north. Even the Iron Islands sent a token tribute, though grudgingly. For a shining moment, it felt as if the realm stood united in joy. Daenerys found herself smiling more easily, holding the baby in her arms while Margaery rested. He had the Targaryen's silver blonde hair, but perhaps a hint of Margaery's gentle features around the eyes. A hush would fall each time Daenerys carried him through the halls, servants bowed, knights lowered their gazes, aware they beheld the next generation of dragons. Yet happiness so often walks hand in hand with tragedy in Westeros. Not a fortnight after Aegon's birth, a raven arrived bearing dire news. Euron Greyjoy had re-emerged in force, attacking merchant vessels near the Shield Islands. Worse, rumors suggested he had allied with unknown sellswords from across the sea. The letter implied a potential invasion or a new campaign of raiding. The Ironborn were not wholly subdued after all, and Euron, unpredictable, cunning, and cruel, posed a threat that could not be ignored. Viserys read the letter in the presence of Margaery, Daenerys, and the council. The color drained from his face. Can I not have 1 month of peace for my wife and son? He demanded bitterly. Then he set the parchment aside. I must respond. If Euron is forging alliances with sellswords, he could strike the Reach or even the Crownlands by sea. We cannot let that stand. Margaery's eyes filled with worry. We just finished one war. The city still recovers. Is there no chance of negotiation? Ser Barristan shook his head. Euron is not the sort to negotiate. He thrives on chaos. Daenerys glanced at her brother. Then we must gather the royal fleet again. Lord Valerion and Paxter Redwine can lend ships. We should also warn the Reach to strengthen its coastal defenses. Viserys nodded, though he seemed hollowed by the weight of another conflict. Yes, we'll do as we did against Balon Greyjoy. But we must move quickly. The next days were a flurry of activity. Courtiers whispered that Euron Greyjoy, known as the Crow's Eye, might have found exotic weapons or alliances in Essos. Some claimed he possessed a magical horn that could control dragons. Nonsense, most said, but it added to his dark legend. Whatever the truth, Euron was a cunning reaver who thrived on unpredictability. Viserys ordered the fleet outfitted once more, though finances were tighter than ever. A second campaign within such a short span threatened to strain resources. As the Red Keep bustled with preparations, Daenerys watched her brother transform into the stern War King once again. She recognized the determination in his gaze, but also the flicker of dread. Margaery, recovering from childbirth, could only watch anxiously. The infant Aegon remained an island of warmth in the midst of worry, cooing innocently in his cradle, oblivious to the realm's storms. One night, unable to sleep, Daenerys stepped onto a balcony overlooking Blackwater Bay. The moon's reflection shimmered on the dark waves. She recalled how she once stood on the deck of the Fury beside Viserys, fighting the Ironborn. Now, Euron threatened to force them back to war on the water. If they triumphed again, would it truly bring peace? Or would the cycle continue until they destroyed themselves? She closed her eyes, letting the chill wind caress her face. Memories flickered. Her father's madness, her mother's death, exile with Viserys in Essos, the humiliations, the triumphs, the heartbreaks. She thought of the promise she had once made to herself, to protect the weak, to break the chains of cruelty. Had she become just another piece in Westeros's bloody game? Or was there still a path to a kinder rule? Footsteps sounded. Viserys appeared, wrapped in a heavy cloak, face lined with exhaustion. He stepped beside her, staring at the sea. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he let out a tremulous breath. Sometimes I wonder if the throne is cursed, he said quietly. Every time I tighten my grip, it cuts me anew. Daenerys put a hand on his arm. You have done more good than harm, brother. You ended a rebellion without a massacre, showed mercy to Torrenstorm, protected the coasts from the Ironborn. Don't lose hope. He turned to her, eyes shining with a vulnerable gratitude. I only wish Father had left a better legacy. The realm sees me always in that shadow, waiting for me to snap. Sometimes I fear they might be right. She squeezed his arm gently. You are not him. And if you ever stray, I will remind you who you are. He gave a tight nod. Thank you, sister. They stew. In silence, the waves below echoing the tumult in their hearts. Dawn would come soon enough, bringing new challenges, new whispers of war. But in that cold moonlit hour, King Viserys Targaryen and Princess Daenerys Targaryen, the last of the dragon blood, found a fragile bond of understanding. They had come so far from beggars in a foreign land to the rulers of a fractured realm. Whether that realm could be truly healed or would devour them in the end was a question neither could yet answer. Spring arrived in halting fits, patches of warm sunshine followed by chilling rains. As the king busied himself with final preparations to confront Euron Greyjoy at sea, Daenerys sought one more audience with him. She found him in the map room studying charts of the coast with Lord Valerion and Ser Jorah. "Brother," she said softly, "I must speak with you alone." Viserys dismissed the others. Once they were gone, Daenerys stepped closer, hands clasped. "Let me sail with you." He blinked, surprise flickering across his face. "What? I know the sea campaign will be dangerous, but I fought at your side before. We succeeded. If you mean to face Euron's madness, I can help. The men rally when we are both there. I want to fight for Westeros, not sit idle while you risk your life again." He frowned, glancing at the charts. "I remember how you insisted on coming last time, and it turned out well enough. But this is different. Euron might have monstrous cunning. We suspect he's not alone. He could have Sel's words from Essos. I can't risk losing you." She pressed on. "And if we lose you, what happens then? Marjorie and Aegon would be vulnerable. House Targaryen must stand united in crisis. Please, let me share your burden." His expression warred between protectiveness and the logic of her words. Finally, he sighed. "I'll allow it on the condition you remain on a command ship out of direct combat if possible. I can't focus on the battle if I worry you're in the thick of it." Relief and determination filled her. "Agreed. I don't seek glory, only to help." So it was settled Daenerys would join the fleet. Marjorie, recovering from childbirth and beset by motherly worries, tried to dissuade her, but Daenerys reassured the queen that she would take every precaution. Marjorie did not protest further, though her eyes brimmed with concern as she hugged Daenerys farewell. The new Prince Aegon gurgled in his cradle, blissfully unaware that both his father and aunt were departing for war. The royal fleet set sail on a brisk morning, sails snapping in a strong wind. Galleys, cogs, and warships alike formed a formidable line, black and red banners of House Targaryen flying alongside the silver seahorse of House Valerion, the grape clusters of House Redwine, and some smaller sigils from lesser lords. Daenerys stood at the prow of the Fury again, the same flagship that once bore her against Balon Greyjoy's Iron Fleet. Viserys commanded from the deck, wearing lacquered black armor, gazed steel to face the new threat. The sea glistened under the spring sun, deceptively calm. They sailed south, intending to round the coast and intercept Euron's raiding parties near the Shield Islands before he could strike deeper into the Reach. Scouts had reported that Euron's ships were numerous, more than anyone expected, and that some bore unfamiliar markings suggesting Sel's word alliances. Each day at sea felt like a breath held. Daenerys aided in strategy sessions, coordinating with Lord Valerion, while Ser Jorah oversaw the Marines ready for ship-to-ship combat. Viserys paced at times, restless, the old anxieties whispering at the edges of his mind. Yet there was a grim confidence in him now, a sense that he had proven himself in war. On the fifth day, the lookout sighted sails on the horizon. The alarm spread through the fleet. Euron's armada lay ahead, cresting the waves. The king ordered them to advance in battle formation. Trumpets blared across the water. Archers readied, Marines braced for boarding actions. Daenerys stood beside Viserys at the prow, heart pounding, recalling the smell of blood and smoke from the last time. Viserys drew his sword, pointing forward. The war drums began to pound. Euron's fleet emerged from the haze like a nightmare. Slender longships with black sails, menacing iron rams, and a few heavier galleys that must have been captured or purchased from Essos. Some ships bore a red eye on their sails, Euron's sigil, others displayed monstrous designs. The tension was palpable. Then the sides clashed. Chaos erupted. Arrows darkened the sky. The crash of hulls colliding thundered across the waves. Men shouted, steel rang, the stink of burning pitch filled the air. Euron's reavers flung grappling hooks onto Targaryen vessels, swarming aboard with ferocious skill. The Crown's archers responded with volleys of flaming arrows, setting some enemy sails alight. Daenerys tried to remain near the command staff, but the swirl of battle threatened to drag everyone into the fray. Screams punctuated the roiling sea. She caught glimpses of men tumbling overboard, armor dragging them down. Viserys barked orders, face spattered with sea spray. Lord Valerion's ships maneuvered skillfully, using their heavy prows to ram smaller longships. The Redwine galleys hammered Euron's flanks with catapult stones. Yet Euron's men were cunning, darting in and out, setting smaller fires. Daenerys found herself clutching the railing as the Fury rocked, an enemy vessel smashing alongside. Sellswords with strange tattoos leapt onto the deck, howling in foreign tongues. Ser Jorah led a knot of marines to repel them, sword hacking left and right. Daenerys drew her dagger, knuckles white, prepared to defend herself if cornered. The fight raged for what felt like hours, though it might have been far less. The Fury took damage, listing slightly to port. Smoke curled from a small onboard blaze that marines desperately doused. Daenerys heard a triumphant shout. A Targaryen war galley had rammed one of Euron's largest ships, splitting it. Men floundered in the water. Another flash of movement drew her attention, a figure crossing from the enemy's deck to the Fury, agile and tall. He wore scaled black armor and a dark cloak. An iron helm in the shape of a kraken concealed his face. A wicked curved blade gleamed in his right hand. Euron Greyjoy, someone shouted in alarm. Indeed, it had to be him, the dread pirate lord himself, rumored to sow chaos wherever he stepped. Euron moved with terrifying swiftness, cutting down a marine who stood in his path. Viserys turned at the commotion, blade at the ready. Their eyes locked. For a heartbeat, the two faced each other, the Targaryen king who struggled for stability and the crow's eye who reveled in chaos. With a snarl, Euron lunged, blade whistling. Viserys parried, grunting from the impact. Sparks flew. Daenerys cried out, stepping forward instinctively, but Ser Jorah seized her arm, preventing her from rushing into the duel. He must face him, Jorah said through clenched teeth, turning to fend off another attacker. Steel clashed again. Euron laughed, a mocking cackle echoing across the deck. You cling to that throne, boy, but the sea is mine. He feinted high, then struck low. Viserys deflected, though barely in time. Each blow hammered at the king's guard. Euron fought with a cruel flourish, as though dancing on the edge of madness. Viserys hissed, fighting to keep balance on the blood-slicked deck. Daenerys' heart hammered. She saw the fear in her brother's eyes, the memory of every threat and betrayal swirling. Euron pressed in savage. But Viserys had trained under masters in the Red Keep and had seen true combat twice before. Gritting his teeth, he locked swords with Euron, straining. The pirate lord glowered through his helm, his single visible eye gleaming red in the reflection of distant flames. In a burst of determination, Viserys twisted aside, forcing Euron off balance. With a roar, the king slammed the pommel of his sword into Euron's helm, cracking it askew. Euron stumbled, growling. Viserys seized the opening, driving his sword toward Euron's chest. But Euron was faster than anticipated. He pivoted, the blade glancing off his armor. Sparks flared. Euron cackled again, swinging a wild backhand that caught Viserys on the shoulder. The king cried out, dropping to one knee. Daenerys gasped, trying to reach him, but more Sellswords blocked her path. Ser Jorah hacked them aside, clearing a space. Euron raised his blade for a finishing blow, only for Viserys to roll sideways and slash at Euron's leg. Blood spurted. Euron staggered, cursing. Viserys struggled to his feet, battered, arm trembling as he gripped his sword. A wave rocked the ship, throwing them both against the railing. Euron's blade scraped the deck while Viserys swayed, vision likely spinning. For a long heartbeat, they locked eyes again. Then Viserys struck, a desperate thrust. Euron tried to parry, but his wounded leg hampered him. The tip of Viserys' blade speared past Euron's guard, biting into flesh under his ribs. Euron gasped, the mocking laugh dying in his throat. He dropped his sword, staggering backward, blood soaking his black armor. A hush seemed to fall across that portion of the deck as though the entire battle paused to witness. Euron swayed, glaring at Viserys with burning hate. Damn you! Targaryen scum, he rasped, then toppled over the side, vanishing into the churning sea. Viserys slumped, chest heaving. Daenerys rushed forward, ignoring the carnage around them. She reached her brother, helping him stand. His face was pale, lips tight. He's gone, she murmured, peering over the rail into the swirling waters. No sign of Euron remained, just red foam dissolving in the waves. The fighting continued on other decks, but word of Euron's fall spread rapidly. His men lost heart. The Targaryen fleet rallied, driving them back, sinking or capturing many ships. By nightfall, the enemy was broken, fleeing or surrendering. Fires burned on the water, the stench of death thick in the salty air. Daenerys tended to Viserys' wounded shoulder, tearing strips of cloth to stanch the bleeding. He groaned, leaning on her, exhaustion etched in every line of his face. We did it, she whispered. He's dead. Viserys nodded, eyes fluttering shut. The sea took him. The realm is safe again. She brushed damp hair from his forehead. For now, brother. That night, the Targaryen fleet tended its wounds, picking up survivors from the water, extinguishing fires. The cost was high, many good men lost. But Euron's menace ended. In the morning, under a sullen gray sky, the battered fleet limped back toward more welcoming shores. Daenerys never saw Euron's corpse, and a part of her wondered if he might somehow have survived, clinging to life like a vengeful wraith. But no sign of him ever emerged, and the hush that settled over the Ironborn in the following months suggested their dread pirate lord was truly gone. When King Viserys returned home, the city greeted him with relief and subdued cheers. He was hailed once more as a protector of the realm, victor over the mad pirate. Margaery, cradling baby Aegon, wept with joy to see him alive, though the fresh scars on his body told of the narrow escape. Daenerys stood at his side, her own armor scorched and dented, hair matted from salt. The realm had survived another storm. Yet the scars were not only physical, each conflict chipped away at the Targaryen siblings' innocence, forging them into hardened rulers who understood that Westeros devoured the weak. In the weeks that followed, Daenerys drifted through the Red Keep, watching Viserys grapple with the aftermath. Awarding honors, burying the dead, negotiating with the Iron Islands yet again. She perceived in him a new edge, a lingering bitterness. War after war had forced him to kill, to watch men die, to quell rebellion after rebellion. And each time he had come close to losing everything. She recalled the vow she had spoken to herself more than once, that she would not allow her brother to become a monster. But was she stopping it or merely delaying the inevitable? One evening, as the king held court, settling a trifling dispute about farmland, Daenerys stood by the dais and observed how the petitioners shrank from Viserys, as though sensing the turmoil behind his eyes. He spoke calmly, delivered a fair verdict, but attention underscored every word. When the session ended, Daenerys noticed that many lords bowed deeply, almost fearfully. Outside, in the corridor, she confronted him gently. "You're scaring them," she said quietly. "Your presence is heavier. They sense the toll the throne has taken." Viserys blinked, rubbing his temple. "I'm so tired, Dany. Tired of fighting, of listening for the next threat. Yet it never ends. The realm always hungers for more conflict." She placed a hand on his arm. "We can't force the realm to be at peace, but we can lead by example. Show them you still have empathy, not just iron will. They need a gentle hand as well as a strong one." He studied her, eyes clouded. After a moment he nodded, exhaling. "You're right. I won't let Father's shadow consume me." Daenerys was relieved to see him admit that, but a creeping doubt lingered. How many battles, rebellions, and betrayals could a ruler endure before cynicism and paranoia took root? She prayed they would not find out. She prayed that Margaery, the gentle queen, and little Prince Aegon would anchor him in hope. Yet she also felt the realm's weight. Perhaps it was simply the cost of the Iron Throne, a burden no mortal could carry without bending under its terrible weight. Spring edged toward summer. The realm breathed a cautious sigh of relief. No new rebellions flared. No foreign fleets threatened their shores. Margaery's joy in raising Prince Aegon brightened the Red Keep's halls. Daenerys busied herself with tasks of governance, attempting to foster trade links with Essos, mindful that Sellsword armies might still lurk beyond the horizon. Yet life felt momentarily calmer. One afternoon, Daenerys strolled through the palace gardens with Margaery and the infant prince. Birds chirped in the budding trees. A pleasant breeze ruffled the new leaves. Margaery carried Aegon, who gurgled, grabbing at a ribbon on his mother's dress. Daenerys smiled fondly, letting him grasp her finger. She saw how sweetly Margaery cooed to him, a gentle lullaby under her breath. "I love seeing you both like this," Daenerys remarked softly, heart swelling at the innocent tableau. If only the entire realm could find such peace. Margaery's face clouded slightly. "I fear it's just a respite. The realm never sleeps, does it?" Daenerys nodded. "No, but we can cherish these moments." They found Viserys near a marble bench, poring over a scroll delivered by a messenger. When he saw them approach, a small smile touched his lips. He rose, letting Aegon curl his tiny hand around the king's finger. For a moment, father and son locked eyes, and Viserys' stern facade melted. "He has your nose," Daenerys teased, earning a chuckle from Margaery. Then Viserys' gaze flicked back to the scroll. "News from the north," he explained. "Robb Stark has concerns about wildling raids near the wall. He wonders if the crown might send assistance." Margaery sighed. "There is always something." Viserys rubbed Aegon's cheek gently. Yes, he murmured. But let us at least have a moment of calm here. He turned to Daenerys, voice a shade lighter. Would you join us for supper tonight, sister? A private meal. No lords, no councils. Daenerys' chest warmed. I'd be delighted. They continued their stroll, a semblance of family unity shining through the cracks of war and politics. Daenerys inhaled the fragrance of blooming flowers, letting it soothe her. For once, no pressing alarm clamored in her mind. The child cooed, and she tickled his chin, evoking a bright giggle. Even the king laughed, brief but genuine. She caught herself thinking, perhaps the realm might yet know a lasting peace under Viserys' reign if they could navigate the labyrinth of challenges without losing themselves. She had seen how close he'd come to the precipice of cruelty, but each time he had stepped back. She hoped that pattern would endure, that he would not break under the next crisis. And if he did, she would have to make a choice, remain loyal to a tyrant or stand by her principles. That question lingered in her heart like an unresolved chord. But for this sun-dappled afternoon, Daenerys embraced the moment of grace, letting the echoes of laughter ring through the gardens. She resolved to hold on to hope. Hope that the king who had waged battles and faced down rebellions could also guide Westeros into a gentler age. Hope that the Targaryen siblings, once exiles, could fashion a future that transcended their haunted past. Hope, above all, that the next generation, Prince Aegon Targaryen, might inherit a world less scarred by war and that both she and Viserys would still stand, unbroken, to see him thrive. Daenerys often returned to that warm afternoon in the gardens as a touchstone whenever her mind strayed into darker corridors. She could still picture Margaery in a pale yellow gown, Prince Aegon with a tiny fist wrapped around his mother's hair, and Viserys watching them with subdued joy. The sunshine had seemed endless that day, the promise of peace so tangible she could almost taste it. Yet in Westeros, such moments were always fleeting, and as the season advanced, new challenges weighed upon the Targaryen court. It began with whispers drifting down from the north, from the cold expanses beyond Winterfell, where Robb Stark ruled as king in the north under a mutual agreement with Viserys. While the two kings had maintained a tenuous peace through trade pacts and carefully worded treaties, trouble brewed along the wall. There were scattered reports of wildling raids, but also rumors of deeper, more perplexing issues, ragged men speaking of creatures in the far north that stalked the night. Daenerys knew well enough how the realm enjoyed its ghost stories, so she did not pay these tales undue credence at first. But the messages piling on the king's council table indicated a genuine concern among the Night's Watch, whatever shape that concern took. As spring ripened and the threat from Euron Greyjoy receded into the past, Viserys found new reason to brood over the letters from the Night's Watch and the short, carefully composed missives from Robb Stark. Stark had apparently fortified the neck and much of the northern passages, concerned not only about wildlings but about the breakdown of discipline within the Watch itself. The old men at the wall spoke of diminishing numbers and old alliances fraying. King Viserys was torn. Should he send southern men to bolster the wall's defenses, or would that stir old distrust from the north, which so fiercely guarded its independence? It was a matter he discussed at length in his solar, with Margaery and Daenerys joining the small council. On a rainy morning, while Prince Aegon slept in the royal nursery under the care of Margaery's ladies, the king laid out the latest raven from Castle Black on the table. Daenerys sat close, reading over his shoulder. The candlelight glimmered on her silver hair. It appears the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch is asking for more volunteers, Viserys said, brow furrowed. And gold, if we can spare it, to help rebuild the ruined keeps along the wall. Lord Vaemond Valerion, who had proven invaluable in matters of shipping and logistics, leaned forward. Your Grace, the coffers remain strained. After tea. He repeated campaigns in the Stormlands and against Euron Greyjoy. We've needed to reallocate funds to rebuild the fleet and the roads. We can grant them something, but not as much as they want. Ser Barristan Selmy, seated near the window, tapped the hilt of his sword and thought. If the Watch truly needs men, the realm could be persuaded to send criminals or the destitute. It was once a practice that bolstered their ranks. But do we want to force the realm's undesirables north and risk angering the king in the north, who might see it as a southern power shuffle? Viserys sighed, pressing a palm to his temple. I do not wish to provoke Robb Stark. We only recently cemented our alliance after the chaos of Robert's reign. But if the Night's Watch collapses, that's a matter of concern for the entire realm, not just the north. Daenerys noticed Margaery's thoughtful look. The queen wore a soft gown in pale green, her hair in an elegant twist, a subtle crown of braids. Perhaps we might open a dialogue with King Robb, Margaery suggested. Send an envoy, one with genuine empathy for the North's concerns, to ask how we can assist without overstepping. Some compromise could be reached, a smaller donation of gold, but also supplies in the form of grain, timber, and building materials that might help the Watch without encroaching on northern sovereignty. A hush fell. Daenerys could see Viserys' expression shift, acceptance interwoven with wariness. An envoy is a wise idea. Someone who can speak on my behalf with enough authority that Robb Stark respects them. Who should it be? Lord Vaemond proposed sending a neutral lord, perhaps from the Crownlands, but Margaery gave Daenerys a look of gentle encouragement. Daenerys cleared her throat. If you wish it, brother, I might go. I have journeyed to troubled regions before, from Dorne to the Stormlands. I've met Robb Stark once, albeit briefly. He seemed fair-minded. I can present our willingness to support the Watch without infringing on northern prerogatives. Viserys turned, studying her. His lips tightened briefly, as though old protective instincts flared. Would you not prefer to remain in King's Landing for a time? You only recently returned from the Stormlands, and the journey north is long, especially if you must pass the neck and risk the cold. Daenerys offered a slight smile. I'll endure the cold. This might quell any suspicion that the Crown is ignoring northern concerns or trying to meddle in their region. I can speak as your sister, reaffirming the vow of cooperation. He exhaled softly, then nodded. Very well. Prepare for the journey, but take a suitable escort. If trouble stirs in the mountains or near the neck, I won't have you undefended. Grand Maester Benedor can arrange letters to the Night's Watch so they expect you. But I want your priority to be meeting with Robb Stark in Winterfell first. She inclined her head. I understand. Margaery flashed Daenerys a warm, grateful smile. Thank you. I suspect the Northern Lords will respond better to you than to a mere messenger. Daenerys quietly welcomed the sense of purpose. The prospect of heading north, to see that distant land she had only heard of in stories, quickened her pulse. She recalled how Robb Stark had once come to King's Landing to bargain for recognition of northern independence, how Viserys had compromised to avoid war. That fragile compromise still held, but it relied on trust that was not easily sustained. Perhaps she could strengthen it further. That evening, Daenerys found herself walking through the Red Keep's corridors, finalizing the details of her departure. Ser Jorah, as ever, insisted on accompanying her. The Dothraki under her command had diminished in number over the years, but a few loyal riders remained and would ride with her as well, though the North's climate would be harsh for them. A small retinue of gold cloaks would provide additional security. She paused at a window, gazing out at the city's rooftops under a sky tinged with the orange glow of the setting sun. Again, that pang of wanderlust and duty flooded her chest. She had grown accustomed to these journeys, these missions of outreach and negotiation. Even so, each departure felt like stepping onto uncertain ground. In the days that followed, Daenerys carefully gathered the supplies she needed for the trip. Warm furs, plenty of rations for the road, and the requisite letters of introduction. One sealed by King Viserys to Robb Stark, another addressed to the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. Margaery insisted on adding small gifts. A hamper of dried fruits and arbor wine for the Northern Lords, bolts of fine cloth for Lady Stark if she was still in Winterfell. She also arranged for Daenerys to carry additional healing supplies, just in case winter remnants still lingered near the wall. The night before she set off, Daenerys was invited to dine privately with Viserys and Margaery. Prince Aegon napped in a cradle nearby, occasionally stirring with soft whimpers that made Margaery pause mid-sentence to check on him. The meal was simple roast fowl with vegetables and spiced wine. Candles flickered against the walls, the room otherwise quiet. Viserys ate slowly, eyes drifting to his infant son now and again. Daenerys sensed the unspoken tension in him, the reluctance to let his sister ride off once more. When dinner ended, and the servants discreetly cleared the dishes, Margaery took Prince Aegon to the nursery for a final feeding before bed, leaving Daenerys and Viserys alone. He walked her to the corridor leading to her chambers. As they stood near a carved pillar, he gently touched her arm. "Be careful, sister. I will be," she promised. He shifted his weight, expression solemn. "If you sense any trouble, any betrayal, send word. The realm is calmer than it once was, but I trust no region to remain peaceful forever." She placed a hand over his. "I understand, but I expect no treachery from the North. They've found their own brand of independence, yes, but Robb Stark is not the sort to break an accord lightly. Viserys nodded, though a flicker of old suspicion glimmered in his eyes. I hope so. Come back soon. She squeezed his hand. I will. They parted ways. Daenerys retired to her room where she let a maid brush out her silver hair. Tomorrow's ride would be long, so she needed rest. Even as she closed her eyes, though, her mind churned with the swirl of politics and possibilities. The next day dawned with pale sunlight, and Daenerys set forth from King's Landing with her retinue in good order. Citizens gathered by the roadside, some calling blessings upon the Targaryen princess. Others simply watched with guarded curiosity. She rode a sturdy mare this time, having learned from earlier journeys the value of a calm horse in uncertain territories. With her traveled Ser Jorah, 3 Dothraki riders, a small contingent of gold cloaks under a loyal captain named Harold, and several pack horses bearing gifts and supplies. The morning was bright, the crisp air carrying the scent of earth awakening to spring. As they passed under the city gates and onto the King's Road, Daenerys glanced back at the red walls and towers receding behind her. She felt the familiar tug of concern, leaving her brother and nephew behind in a realm that always threatened to boil over. Yet she reminded herself that her mission was important, a step toward bridging gaps that might otherwise crack wide open. The first days of travel were uneventful. They passed farmland greening with new shoots, peasants beginning to till the warming earth. Once or twice, Daenerys paused to speak with local folk, distributing coin or simply offering a sympathetic ear. She had found that such gestures eased small anxieties, reminding people that the Targaryens were not distant tyrants. The roads were still muddy from melted snow in some places, but fewer bandits prowled than in years past. Perhaps the success of the Crown's campaigns had made an impact on the local order. When they reached the Trident, the air turned cooler, the sun often hidden behind gray clouds. The wide river shimmered and traffic on the King's Road thinned. Occasionally, they encountered northern traders with wagons of pelts heading south to markets in the Reach. Such folk eyed Daenerys' party warily, but upon recognizing the Targaryen banners, they bowed respectfully. She inquired about the state of roads further north. Most reported that the neck was passable, though still damp and plagued by biting insects. The mention of insects made some of the gold cloaks groan, recalling tales of the swamps around Moat Cailin. At Moat Cailin, they beheld the ancient ruins that once guarded the causeway into the north. Stones crumbled, moss crept over half-collapsed towers, and a few battered watchposts hinted at minimal maintenance. A small group of northern soldiers stood watch, apparently loyal to Robb Stark. They recognized Daenerys' standard and allowed her party to pass without trouble, though the men were curt, their eyes keen. She sensed they were gauging her presence. None spoke openly of dissatisfaction, but the tension in their stances suggested the old wariness of southern rulers lingered. The landscape changed again beyond the neck, the air sharper, colder. Forests of pine and fir replaced the more temperate woodlands of the south. Nights brought frosty winds, forcing Daenerys and her retinue to huddle in tents around crackling fires. The Dothraki riders endured the chill with stoic resolve, though they kept glancing at the dense, looming forests as if they found them claustrophobic compared to the open plains of Essos. Ser Jorah, hailing from Bear Island, appeared more comfortable with the climate. In fact, he seemed at ease, telling Daenerys quiet stories of northern traditions as they rode. After more than a fortnight on the road, Winterfell rose before them in the distance, a solemn fortress of gray stone nestled among rolling hills. Smoke curled from numerous chimneys, patches of snow lingered in the shadows despite the season's relative warmth. Daenerys recalled how once the Starks and Targaryens had been at war, how Robert's rebellion had begun partly with the kidnapping and tragic end of Lyanna Stark. But that was a generation ago, another epic of regrets and grievances. Now she approached with the promise of cooperation, hoping the uneasy truce with the North could be strengthened. A party of mounted guards met them a short distance from the castle. One of them, a tall man with auburn hair tied back, introduced himself as Lord Edwin Serwyn, sworn to House Stark. He inclined his head politely. Princess Daenerys, King Robb Stark awaits you at Winterfell. He extends his hospitality. Daenerys returned the courtesy. Thank you, my lord. We come in peace, bearing words from King Viserys. The guards formed an escort around her group, guiding them through the open gates and into the courtyard of Winterfell. Stone walls loomed, and the warmth of the castle's renowned hot springs rose like a faint haze. Stable hands hurried to take the horses, while curious onlookers gathered at a respectful distance. Daenerys dismounted, handing her reins to a young groom. She pulled her fur-lined cloak tighter, the northern chill biting at her cheeks. Ser Jorah and the others formed a protective cluster around her, though not too imposing. They wanted to show deference, not aggression. Across the courtyard, Robb Stark emerged from a doorway wearing a heavy cloak of gray wool trimmed with white fur. His red-brown hair framed a solemn face, though a polite smile tugged at one corner of his mouth. He was accompanied by a few northern lords and a pair of guards bearing the dire wolf sigil. As he approached, Daenerys noted the measure of confidence in his step. He was young still, but he had ruled the north for years now, forging alliances, warding off conflicts. She dipped her head in greeting. "Your Grace," she said, addressing him by the northern title. "I come on behalf of my brother, King Viserys Targaryen." Robb inclined his head. "Princess Daenerys, you are welcome in Winterfell. I trust your journey was without trouble." Daenerys let a small smile form. "Other than sore limbs and cold nights, no trouble. We appreciate your hospitality." He glanced at Ser Jorah, a faint flicker of recognition passing over his features, perhaps recalling the name Mormont from Bear Island. Then he looked at the Dothraki with a polite curiosity. "Please come inside. Winterfell's halls will warm you. I suppose we have much to discuss about the Night's Watch and the realm at large." They followed him into the castle proper, passing through corridors of ancient stone, tapestries depicting wolves and weirwoods. The flickering torchlight revealed a sturdy, practical decor. Winterfell was not flamboyant like the Red Keep, but it exuded a quiet strength. Eventually, they reached the Great Hall, already lit by large hearths that banished the worst of the chill. Servants moved about, arranging seating, while lords and ladies of the north gathered in subdued conversation. Robb introduced Daenerys to his wife, Queen Jane Stark, a dark-haired woman with kindly eyes who greeted Daenerys with genuine warmth. "Welcome to Winterfell, Princess. We hope you'll find respite here after your long journey." Daenerys offered a courteous nod, responding, "Thank you, Your Grace. I've long wished to see the north in gentler circumstances." Jane smiled. "Then you shall." After initial pleasantries, Robb led Daenerys to a smaller side chamber, more private, where a feast had been prepared for her arrival. It was not ostentatious. Northern fare favored hearty stews, bread, and roasted meats, but it was generous, with ale and spiced wine aplenty. Daenerys, Ser Jorah, and a couple of her more senior escorts joined Robb, Jane, and several of his key bannermen at a long table. By the time the first course was served, the tension had eased somewhat, conversation flowing about the roads, the weather, and small amusements of court life. Eventually, Robb turned to Daenerys, eyes serious. "I gather your brother sent you to speak about the Night's Watch. They're in dire need, so the letters say." Daenerys set down her cup. "Yes, they have made appeals for more resources. The Crown, of course, has limited funds after so much unrest in recent years, but we recognize the importance of the wall. My brother hopes we can find a balanced arrangement. Some coin, some supplies. Perhaps men willing to take the black, though we would not force that upon them." The northern lords exchanged glances. One of them, a grizzled man with a short beard, spoke up. "We appreciate any help the Watch can get. But you'll understand the king in the north must ensure the Watch remains neutral. No sense allowing it to become a puppet for southern agendas." Daenerys nodded calmly. "Of course, the Watch stands apart from all crowns in principle. We only wish to ensure it does not collapse from want." Robb drummed his fingers on the table. "I've had men patrolling the Gift, those lands near the wall. We try to feed the Watch from time to time, but the harvests have not been bountiful. Many lords in the north are still rebuilding from earlier conflicts. Even so, if the Crown is prepared to send shipments of grain, fish, or other staples, we can help transport them from White Harbor to East Watch. That might be the easiest route by sea, rather than hauling everything up the King's Road." Daenerys exchanged a quick look with Ser Jorah. "That could be feasible. Ships from King's Landing or Dragonstone might carry supplies up the East Coast. My brother can coordinate with Lord Valerion or Lord Redwine to see which fleet is best positioned." Robb's expression lightened slightly, as if they were already bridging a gap. "That's promising. As for men, the North may not want an influx of criminals from southern dungeons, but volunteers or second sons seeking a place that might be acceptable. The Watch will take them, I'm sure." She offered a small smile. We would not wish to offend the North by dumping the worst criminals here, but perhaps some form of limited conscription for men guilty of lesser crimes, who choose the wall over more dire sentences. That used to be standard practice. A hush followed. Then Robb inclined his head. I'll not oppose it, provided it's done with a measure of discretion. They continued speaking of the practical details. Shipping routes, how best to address the shortfalls in the Night's Watch. Daenerys appreciated Robb's measured approach. He was neither eager to submit to the crown's influence nor blindly antagonistic. By the end of the meal, they had laid the groundwork for a workable arrangement, a fraction of the resources requested, but enough to bolster the Watch's immediate needs. Later, as the feast waned, Robb invited Daenerys to stay as long as she wished in Winterfell. The warmth of the hot springs and the thick northern walls provided a cozy respite from the chill outside. Daenerys agreed graciously. She intended to ride north to the wall eventually, but first she would rest and finalize the details. That evening, she was shown to guest chambers in the Old Keep. Rooms well furnished, though in a simpler style than the Red Keep's lush decor. A fire blazed in the hearth, warding off the creeping cold of the northern night. In the morning, snow flurries danced in the courtyard. Daenerys wrapped herself in furs and stepped outside to see Winterfell under a dusting of white. She wandered through the yard, smiling at the sight of stable hands brushing snow off the horses, of children chasing each other in puffs of breath. Beyond the walls, the forests glowed with fresh frost. A hush pervaded, broken only by the ring of steel where soldiers practiced in the training yard. The North had its own stark beauty, she thought, a realm forged from resilience and quiet pride. Robb joined her later for a tour of Winterfell's crypts, a place of reverence for House Stark, where the statues of ancient kings and lords kept silent vigil. Torches illuminated the stone faces, each bearing a sword across their lap. The air smelled of earth and time. Daenerys felt a gentle shiver, as if the centuries pressed upon her. Robb explained some of the storied names. Torrhen Stark, the king who knelt, Brandon the Builder, and so many others who had shaped the North's legacy. She listened with genuine interest, sensing that this history formed the backbone of Stark loyalty. Each statue told a tale of unwavering fortitude. In turn, Robb asked after Targaryen history, curious about their perspective after so many upheavals. Daenerys spoke of Aegon the Conqueror, how the dragons once united the Seven Kingdoms, and how her father's madness had torn them apart. She did not shy away from the truth. She admitted the realm's rightful hatred of Aerys' cruelty and how Viserys struggled to prove he was different. Robb listened gravely, nodding at intervals. There in the crypts, with dust motes drifting in torchlight, they found a space for quiet honesty, unvarnished by the usual trappings of court. Later that afternoon, as a light snow began to fall, Daenerys stood on the battlements overlooking the Winterfell godswood. Ser Jorah stepped beside her, arms folded. "You seem content here," he observed softly. "Does it please you to see a corner of Westeros that isn't actively rebelling?" She gave a rueful laugh. "Yes, in a way. It's peaceful compared to King's Landing, though that can change quickly." He nodded, exhaling a visible breath in the chill air. "True enough, but if these talks go well, we might strengthen ties. The North will fee."